National to the courthouse, which, you know, a lot of work obviously going into something like this because of all the security with a former president. We are seeing now more law enforcement heading out here of Trump National. And I was looking down the road here on 87th Avenue, and, you know, they are blocking off every intersection to make sure they have a very smooth commute from here at the hotel all the way to Trump, to the courthouse. And, you know, Lauren was saying a little bit ago, it is a 25-minute ride about or so from here to the courthouse. And we are expecting, again, any minute to see the president, former president, leave here at the hotel, his hotel, one of his many hotels. And you can hear those supporters in the background here. We spoke to some of them earlier. I don't know if we have that sound, but we spoke to one of the supporters earlier. Listen to what he had to say about why he decided to come out here to support the former president.
We still have a constitution in this country, and everyone has rights. And if we don't exercise those rights, eventually we're going to lose them.
All right, Terry, let me jump in here for a second as we continue to wait. Thank you so much for your reporting from Trump National. Doral, keep that camera up because we certainly want to see that shot of the former president's motorcade leaving his resort in Doral along 87th Avenue. Expected to happen any moment now. We saw a large group of motorcycle officers leaving a few minutes ago. It looks like we're starting to see some SUVs. I'm counting so far 2 or 3. That's pretty much what it was like yesterday afternoon. I'm seeing a 4th black SUV there now. As they were approaching and arriving from Miami International Airport, it was several SUVs. They were so tinted, those back windows, you could not even see whether the former president, which vehicle he was inside, but it appears as though his official motorcade is now leaving Trump National Doral along 87th Avenue in Doral to make the trek east over to the Wilkie D. Ferguson Federal Courthouse here in downtown Miami. I can't see on the ground there whether it's 87th Avenue that's blocked off heading south to get on the 836, and if that's going to be their route, or perhaps they'll cut over onto 36th Street to the Palmetto and then get onto 836. We're going to continue watching this. I can't tell if they're going south. If anyone, maybe the anchors have a better vantage point. Jim and Naja, does it look like they're continuing to go south on 87th Avenue to make their way over to the 836?
Right now it does, in fact, look that way, Lauren. And as we see the motorcade slowly leaving Trump Doral Golf Resort, that appears to be the route. And let's not get lost on the historic nature of this event. The former president here in Miami to answer to 37 counts in an indictment that was unsealed last week, and it details many counts against the former president, accusing him of holding on to classified documents, basically saying that the president should have returned those documents and he did not, then obstructed and interfered with the investigation to try to get those documents returned to the National Archives. As we see this procession slowly making its way down 87th Avenue, Lauren, certainly a historic moment, not only in American history, but certainly here in South Florida.
And Lauren, while we continue to watch this, I want to, you being out in the field and experiencing it live, want to talk to you about the feeling, because this is, just looking at it, it's very different than what we saw when the president, of course, made his appearance in Manhattan. This seems to be much more scaled back in terms of barricades. You know, we've heard that police and law enforcement are using their own cars. There are not a lot of gates. So this is a very different scene. Describe that feeling. What are you seeing in terms of that?
In fact, Naja, interesting that you mentioned the barricades, or rather the lack thereof, here in downtown Miami. Multiple federal sources have actually told CBS News that they are concerned, really, about the security here outside of the courthouse being supervised and overseen by Miami police, because from what they are hearing from their federal sources, it's Miami police really only using the yellow crime scene tape to keep crowds at bay, to keep them contained. And really, I did not see any barricades as I was driving in. It's possible that they might set them up a little bit later, but usually you would see those along the sidewalk ready to be deployed at a moment. I really only saw other officers and their vehicles blocking off the ability to turn onto certain streets right in front of the courthouse. So that potentially could be an issue here, maybe a little bit later as the former president actually arrives to the courthouse. But because of the way that the federal courthouse complex is set up down here in downtown Miami, it's possible that he will be able to make his way in and out without even being seen. So it won't really rile up the crowd in that way because they're not going to see him. And even if they see those SUVs pass by, if they're the same ones from yesterday, those windows are so tinted that you can't really see. The only way that you would see the former president is if he chooses and makes the decision to address his supporters and the protesters gathered here in some way, either by, rolling down the window, giving them a wave, or coming out here. Now, that is probably not likely, but, we never say never, and we're ready for any eventuality. But we are hearing from CBS News that federal sources are telling them that they are a bit concerned about the security or the lack thereof. But there are multiple different agencies on top of this. We got Miami Police Department handling the security. Miami-Dade is ready to help as well, plus the U.S. Marshals, which protect the courthouse, and of course the Secret Service, which protect the former president. Guys?
And Lauren, just speaking to that, you're right. We have a sort of collaboration between the federal government and Miami law enforcement, and it's sort of a different approach because what I'm hearing is that Miami law enforcement is basically saying that this is a pro-Trump protesters are anticipated to be out there. So they're approaching it differently, not anticipating necessarily a big uprising. I guess the concern would be, however, if they're opposers, right? People in contrast, and then the two sides may conflict, and that's when we could potentially see something heated, and that's the concern.
All righty, and we're looking now at...
And of course, we've seen signs out here on both sides. I'm sorry, Jim, to interrupt you, but just on Naja's point there, we have seen signs on both sides. There was a truck that we saw where it was Donald Trump behind bars, and another truck also with a big billboard on it that had several Democrats behind bars with Trump in front of the jail cell. So people from both sides, there may be some counter protesting going on here, but for right now, things have remained somewhat calm. I'm sure closer to the actual courthouse building, perhaps, people are getting a bit more riled up as they're starting to hear that the president is on his way. And Jim, I think you were beginning to mention exactly where he is. I believe he's on the 836 heading eastbound right now, as according to our chopper picture.
Well, right now we're looking at traffic, which is at a standstill, Lauren, on 826 southbound, as they have cleared that way to make certain that the former president's motorcade has a clear path down to the federal courthouse in downtown Miami. Lauren, you talked about the fact that there were concerns about security. Have you seen any protesters there at the federal courthouse scene yet?
From where I am right now, Jim, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I'm being kept at a pretty safe distance. Right now, it looks like we're still showing some of the traffic, but maybe if we come back to my live picture here from where I am at the courthouse, you can get a better idea of exactly where I am in comparison to where the groups are gathered right now. They're way about 2 blocks away, 2 city blocks away, and there's a big court complex where it is blocked off and vehicles would have to drive through in order to reach where the protesters or where the former president's supporters are currently gathered right now. But I gotta say, there was also a lot of media presence over there. So if you're seeing any perhaps chopper pictures from up above, that image might be a tiny bit deceiving because there's a lot of tents, but a lot of that is for the worldwide media that has converged here on downtown Miami in order to get a front row seat and to capture this historic moment for viewers all around the world. Looks like traffic once again, though, Jim and Naja, is moving on the Palmetto Expressway, so perhaps the former president is now far enough east that he has passed the Palmetto and that traffic can start to flow once again.
And Lauren, I want to talk now about what happens when the former president actually gets into the federal courthouse. You mentioned something. He can choose basically not to be seen. That will be at his discretion. We know you mentioned that he's got this big campaign rally that he's planning, so he may want to be seen to rally support. But essentially, once he gets into that federal courthouse, he's under arrest. We know that he will be fingerprinted. He will not get a mug shot, and the reasoning behind that is that typically mug shots are for when we're concerned that someone either facing charges or a suspect could be on the lam. That's not a big concern when we're talking about former President Donald Trump. He's arguably one of the most recognizable men in the world right now. But what are you anticipating? Because this is going to be interesting for us to cover as journalists. There's going to be no cameras inside, and once he's inside, everybody's inside. They're pretty much locked in.
Yeah, no cameras and even basically no cell phones. We got the order from the court yesterday essentially reminding everyone they could check your phone if needed to make sure that you're not recording anything and to make sure that you're not capturing any images, audio, video, anything of the sort, because this is a federal court proceeding. We are anticipating that there will be sketch artists there in the courtroom to be able to capture the moment. Some of them who will be capturing perhaps what the former president is looking like in these moments, and also other people in the courtroom as well. That'll take a little bit of time for us to actually see those images, but we will have a reporter in the courtroom who, as soon as this is all said and done, will come out and debrief us and explain to us exactly how this all went down. Everything we've heard so far is that this will likely be a pretty quick process because of the timetable that the former president has to head right back out of town. I'm going to toss things over to CBS News Miami's Joe Gorcho right now. I know that he has been speaking to people all day long, getting a feel of the atmosphere here at the courthouse. Joe, what are you hearing from the former president's supporters right now?
John, can you see me? Can you, Lauren? We're up. Yeah, sorry, Laura, can you repeat the last thing?
I can hear you, Joe.
Yes.
I'm not sure if...
Yeah, we were just moving spots because behind me right here, it's getting a little crowded. So that's why we had to move. So I apologize for the real-time delay, right? Live TV. But you're seeing more supporters of the president now gather here in front of the courthouse. The anticipation's building, of course, for his arrival. Of course, the big question is, will anybody even see the former president make his appearance here into the federal court? That's the big question. Now, earlier today, we had a little bit of a situation with a suspicious package that was found over here. They looked at it. It was just a TV. They took it apart and then took it away. But that's been the only thing here that's really been any sort of volatility. It's been rather quiet, rather calm. We have seen some detractors make their ways up and down the street here outside the federal courthouse, making their presence felt. But there's only been few and far between. Mostly Trump supporters are present. Now, I did have a chance to speak with the City of Miami Mayor Francis Suarez. He, for the most part of the day in the morning, was inside the Control Command Center, viewing the security presence, making sure everything was calm and being taken care of. And I had a chance to speak with him one-on-one just a bit about 30 minutes ago. Take a listen. So what's your point of being out here today? What are you trying to observe? What are you seeing? Like, what's your mission?
As a mayor, you always want to be on the ground. I've been in the command center earlier today, and things seem good. I'm doing an interview now in a few minutes with a national news station, but the crowd is under control. Our officers have a phenomenal plan. They're doing a great job, and we're hopeful that this begins and ends without any incident, where people can express their constitutional rights. That's what makes this country great. That's what people have died for in this country. And so many people have fled their country of origin because they don't have that same right. So it's a right that we celebrate. It's a right that we want to uphold. We want people to have that right without there being any sort of negative incident.
When you talk about no negative incident, we saw a suspicious package being looked at. What did you just think of the response? Obviously, nothing came out of it, but what was...
The response is effective. I mean, our officers have a tremendous amount of experience. They know how to deal with these kinds of incidents. They do it in a professional manner. And as you can see, the way that they're working today, they're being very, very professional.
In terms of today, and obviously the feelings on both sides, what is your sentiment in terms of what is transpiring today in that courtroom with the arraignment?
My sentiment right now is to be the mayor of the city and to make sure that whatever happens, there's safety among everyone who's involved, among all of our residents, among people who may not be from here, who may come and visit. We just want to make sure that everything begins and ends in a way that respects people's rights, but also maintains order and safety.
And again, you hear the priority today from the mayor himself, making sure everything is safe and everyone has the right to voice their opinion, no matter what side they fall on here in terms of supporting or being a detractor in this instance. And again, Mayor Suarez would not answer, again, how he feels about today's particular arraignment. We know he's been a little bit vocal on national media about what side he feels in terms of the indictment itself. But today he's focused on what he told me, as you heard there, doing his job. We also saw the Miami-Dade Police Director, Freddie Ramirez, taking his rounds over here, just doing a sweep about an hour ago, walking with some of the people from his unit, just making sure, again, everything's calm, everything's relaxed in anticipation of the former president's arrival here. But as you can tell, it's just relatively calm. Not much either way. People just building up for the moment as the former president gets set to make his appearance here in federal court. Lauren?
All right, Joe Gorcho live for us over at the federal courthouse. I'm just a couple of blocks away here where things are also very calm, and where we are right now, the traffic is actually able to flow. But it'll be interesting to see, well, whether in the next couple of minutes or so they will have to block this street off as well because of the former president's impending arrival. So we're definitely going to keep an eye on that situation, because this is where the guard gate is to get into this courthouse for vehicles to be actually able to drive in. And as we've reported, we are anticipating that it is possible that Trump will just make his way into the courthouse complex without actually being seen outside. Let's turn things over now to Joan Murray. She's also live there. Joan, it looks like we're seeing a lot of American flags, Trump flags, people in favor of the former president and here to defend him. When we've heard from some people yesterday, they said that they don't just feel that this is an attack on the former president. His supporters feel like this is an attack on them. They are taking this very personally.
Yeah, Lauren, I can tell you that we've been here a few hours and the crowd has definitely gotten bigger. So take a look. As you pointed out, many people are carrying flags. Many of them say Trump 2024 in anticipation of their support for the former president running for the office once again. For the most part, it has been relatively calm. Now and then there will be chants breaking out, people shouting Trump, Trump, Trump. Other times there are some minor skirmishes between by far the Trump supporters outnumbering the anti-Trump people that were here. We saw one contingent a couple hours ago get into a little bit of a shouting match, but for the most part this has all remained calm. Right behind me you see some people have actually have step ladders to get up above the crowd. As you pointed out, they are here in support of the president. They do not support what the Justice Department is doing. They say these charges are not valid, and they say they really want to be here in support of the former president. We talked to some of the supporters here, and what struck me is how many people have come from out of town. I talked to people from Massachusetts and from California and from all over the country. And I said, do you always travel to rallies in support of the former president? And some of them said that they had never been to anything like this, of this nature, but they felt so strongly about what is happening that they felt a need to be here. So again, we anticipate that the crowd will keep getting bigger in anticipation of that 3 o'clock hour when the former president is supposed to face a federal judge. Lauren?
All right, Joan Murray live for us at the courthouse. I'm keeping an eye on the smaller box on our screen right now. It appears as though the former president's motorcade is exiting the highway, so it looks as though they are getting much closer to their arrival here at the federal courthouse. I'm going to turn things back over to Jim and Naja, who have a better view of exactly what's going on in the air from Chopper 4. Guys, this arrival is really happening any minute now, right?
It looks to be. They are making a pretty good time there, Lauren, as they head east from Doral to the courthouse. So I do think you will see some activity there very, very soon. Of course, the former president here in Miami to be arraigned on 37 counts in an indictment that was unsealed last week, accusing him of assorted crimes, accusing him of holding on to classified documents when he should have returned them to the National Archives, and then obstructing the effort to get those documents returned. I want to bring in CBS News Miami's Jim DeFede for perspective. And Jim, obviously this is a story that has so many sides to it. There is the story of the former president appearing in court, and then as we saw with the protesters, there's the court of public opinion. Your view here on the dichotomy that we're seeing?
Yeah, politically, this indictment has been a boon to the former president. Legally, it represents the greatest peril he's facing, much greater than the case in New York, greater even than the civil case he was found liable for in terms of sexual assault. This is a case that has a great deal of teeth to it and could be devastating and could see the former president end up in prison. But politically, you know, this has been an absolute boon for him. It has solidified more and more Republicans around him who do, as you said, see this as an attack on them, not just an attack on the former president. And one quick quick thing I just want to note, you know, you talk about history. When we go back to Lauren Pastrana and her live shot, over her right shoulder is the old federal courthouse, where Manuel Noriega, the last head of state or former head of state, was put on trial. So Miami has done this before, but that's just a little piece of history that makes Miami so unique. Just over her right shoulder is that courthouse where Manuel Noriega was tried.
And I want to speak to something you just mentioned, Jim, because you said that the Republican Party is interpreting this as an attack on them. But I think within the last several hours, we have seen some staunch Republicans sort of soften their stance. We heard Lindsey Graham basically speak to the media and say that former President Donald Trump maybe brought this on himself a little bit, that that oftentimes politicians dig their own holes. And that's a sort of softening.
100%. You know, I think that what you're seeing here is that there is an increasing understanding that this case came about because of the actions of Donald Trump. Unlike the case of, you know, that they want to cite about Mike Pence and Joe Biden, you know, who also had documents. We see them now. We can see the motorcade now pulling into the federal courthouse complex. That is a guard shack that they have to pause for. I will tell you, I'm familiar with this guard shack, where they have steel beams that come up out of the ground to block off, so you cannot ram into the courthouse. So that those bars have to be lowered, and to believe it or not, those vehicles still have to be swept, at least initially. Now, he will go through that area right there. They will make a slight right and go to the northeast corner, or northwest corner rather, of the Wilkie D. Ferguson building. That's my anticipation, where there's a secure sally port where he can exit the vehicle underground or under covering and go into it. So we'll see. We may catch a glimpse of him leaving the vehicle when the vehicle clears this security checkpoint and goes in. It's amazing that they actually have to check the vehicles still, even though that this is a presidential, former presidential motorcade.
So what you're saying, Jim, is highly unlikely that they won't get a glimpse of the former president.
Unless somehow Chopper is able to get that shot just, it's literally like maybe 100 yards once they get through that gate area there to they'll bank to the right and go to the northwest corner of the building where the sally port is. That's my anticipation, and that's where he would exit the vehicle. It has very high walls and a lot of trees, not surprisingly, to try to keep people from being able to see what takes place in that sally port area. But we'll see if we actually get a view of it or not.
And while we continue to monitor this, Jim, let's talk a little bit about these documents, because, you know, the indictment, I've had a chance to look at a little bit of it, and it almost reads like a story. And the focus is really the issue of national security, that essentially the former president was keeping these crown jewels of documents in boxes in his bathroom. Can you talk about the significance of that and why we are hearing legal experts say that these are such serious charges?
So again, to the point that I was making earlier, that you have a situation here whereas if Donald Trump had complied with investigators early on, with the National Archives, and had returned these documents when they first asked for them more than a year ago, we would not be here today. It was only through Trump's actions of not just refusing to turn over the records, but taking active steps, according to the indictment, to hide those records and to prevent his attorneys, or to encourage his attorneys to remove them so they could not be returned. That's what has gotten Donald Trump into trouble. Now, the nature of the documents are also really devastating, in the sense of what you have is you have documents related to national security issues, some of the most sensitive issues, including possible attacks, you know, the planned strategy and how we would attack Iran in the event that we needed to, nuclear capabilities of some of our allies as well as some of our opponents. So this is very serious. I think this goes to your earlier question as to why they would have why some Republicans are now softening their approach, because I think after initially trying to do whataboutism, what about Hillary, what about Joe Biden, what about Mike Pence, they're suddenly realizing the breadth of the charges contained in it and what it actually entails, and it's hard to defend.
And Jim, also I think it's important to make the distinction that these documents allegedly were stored at Mar-a-Lago, which doubles not only as his residence here in West Palm Beach, Florida, but also it's a private club. There are 150 employees who work there, so it's an unusual situation because those documents, which allegedly were stored in bathrooms, as Naja mentioned, also a ballroom, could have been seen by anybody. And the indictment also alleges that the former president actually showed some of these documents to people who had no security clearance.
Yeah, and let's remember, Mar-a-Lago has also been the target of infiltration by Chinese agents. There was a spy case brought out of it as somebody tried to, use access to Mar-a-Lago, which is a public club, to be able to try to get access to Trump and those around him. So yeah, there was some concern about that. Plus, he also transported some of the records to Bedminster. Took the boxes with him when he left Mar-a-Lago and would go up during the summer months up to Bedminster. So this has been an ongoing issue.
And one of Trump's justifications was essentially that these were classified them and then he unclassified them, but they don't become at one point national security secrets and then become idle gossip.
Well, that's the case. And the question is, there's no proof that he actually declassified any of these records while he was president. He's not allowed to do it after he leaves office. And according to the indictment, there seems to be evidence in the form of tape recordings in which Donald Trump acknowledges in showing them off that he's not allowed to show them off, that they are not declassified documents, but he's doing it anyway.
All right. So in case you're just joining us, you're watching CBS News Miami special report coverage of former President Donald Trump and his arrival at the federal courthouse in downtown Miami. In about an hour or so, he'll be arraigned on these charges that Jim DeFede is outlining for us. And there you see the very coordinated security presence being coordinated by the City of Miami Police. To the left in the smaller screen, you see a small group of protesters. We presume they are pro-Trump supporters who have shown up to show their support for the former president.
And we know when former President Trump walks into the federal courthouse, it will actually be very quick. He's been vocal in the 24 hours leading up to this, basically saying that he's going to walk in, he's going to say not guilty, and then that's sort of the gist of it. We know that he will be fingerprinted, and it's an electronic fingerprint, which is standard now. He will not be handcuffed, and he also will not get a mugshot. The big concern, of course, is when typically you get a mugshot, it's because they're concerned that someone may flee, go on the lam, but that is not the case here, as Trump is one of the most recognizable figures in the world right now. Yeah,
you take a mugshot because you don't know what the guy looks like, but everybody knows what Donald Trump looks like.
Exactly.
So that is absolutely right. In the meantime, as we see the situation unfold there outside the courthouse, and we saw the reports from Joan Murray and Joe Gorcho, and they reported earlier that the crowd of Trump supporters has grown significantly. There were reports of busloads of people coming in from Orlando, but we heard one of our reporters mention that they interviewed somebody who came from as far away as Massachusetts to show their support.
Yeah, and of course the big concern is that we know what can happen when former President Donald Trump incites or encourages protesters and people to come out in support of him. We have heard a lot of chatter on social media. We know that a busload from Orlando is expected to arrive sometime today. And this has been really interesting to see the collaboration between federal law enforcement and then Miami local law enforcement.
Najee, can I jump in on
yes,
that point
please.
for a second? One of the interesting things that they are finding in the intelligence community that they've been looking at with regard to the social media is there is actually a thread that's going around telling people, Trump supporters, not to show up because they're worried that this is an FBI setup for those who believe in the conspiracy theory that what happened on January 6th was instigated by Antifa and it was an FBI setup to arrest Trump supporters. So that has actually been very dominant in a lot of Trump spaces on social media, encouraging his supporters not to show up, that it could be a trap laid by federal agents, which I just think is fascinating gameplay on everybody's side.
It absolutely is, especially because it could come from so many different sides, a lot of different angles to look at that. But, the real concern would just be that protesters and counter-protesters would clash, and then that would elevate to a level. But so far, things have been incredibly peaceful.
And probably a major reason is because of the heavy police presence that you're seeing there on that street. Jim, what street are we looking at? Are we looking at Flagler? street there? Or is it
I'm not
hard to tell, isn't it? Yeah, but you can see there's no traffic whatsoever moving on that street, and we expect it's going to be that way for the better part of the afternoon, early afternoon, until the former president departs that area.
Jim, I want to switch gears a bit now and talk about sort of the legal team, because within the last several hours we've been hearing a lot about this as well, that Trump is going to be looking for local representation. It's a requirement, as I understand.
It's helpful. Like you want local counsel because you want folks who understand even though all federal courts are theoretically the same, every district has their own special nuances. You also want to understand who the players are, who the judges are, the magistrates. You want to have a feel for all of those sorts of things. So having a local attorney who is familiar with all of that is very, very critical. And the Trump team, as you were alluding to, has been trying to find local counsel but has had difficulties. Look, Donald Trump has a reputation for being a difficult client. That's one of the complicating factors. So, I know that there have been a number of high-level attorneys who have been approached, who have declined, some of it because their caseload doesn't allow it right now, others because Donald Trump has a history of being difficult. Look, several of his attorneys have previously been indicted themselves or ended up going before a grand jury. So this is a volatile client to have. Plus, he has a history of having issues with regard to paying some of his attorneys, so attorneys always ask for money up front. So it's a very complicated situation. I think he will find local counsel. I just don't think he was able to do it in time for this hearing. I
would imagine that there would be some local lawyers who would be eager to jump on board just for the sake of the high-profile nature of this case.
Yeah, that cuts both ways, though. You know,
right.
Then you become known as the Donald Trump attorney, and sometimes that you take what some people would consider a reputational hit. Yeah. Plus, let's also be realistic. These charges are devastating. Do you want to be the attorney who loses this case that could send the former president to prison? That's another factor.
It's also important to note that we won't just see the former president in court. We also expect to see Walt Nauta, who is a right-hand man who, according to the indictment, helped the former president to keep these documents away from the National Archives. And we'll also see Jack Smith, the special prosecutor appointed by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland. And do you think we'll find out any more about the structure and the nature of this case today, Jim?
I really don't. I don't think we're going to find out a lot more. I think that this is, as you keep alluding to, I think it's a 15-minute hearing. I think it's very quick. I think they go in, he takes a plea, they'll set a future court date, and they'll move on. You know, he'll probably spend more time, dealing with the marshals for the fingerprinting, the DNA, all those sorts of issues and being processed than he actually will in court. But yeah, so I don't envision that this hearing will take long or that we're going to learn much new. So yeah, we'll see if there's any new attorneys in there. And you're right to Walt Nauta. Walt Nauta is what's known as the body man when he was president. Means his personal valet, the person who, like, somebody hands him a gift on the rope line, he turns to Walt, he hands it to him so he doesn't have it cluttered. When Walt needs, or when Donald Trump needs a Diet Coke, Walt Nauta is the guy who comes and gets it for him. And he has remained by the former president since leaving the White House, and even after being indicted, is still with the former president at Bedminster and flew down with him from Bedminster yesterday because he's being arraigned as well.
And that's a dynamic that I think a lot of people were looking at because they wondered maybe might Nauta decide to split from the former president at this point, maybe to cover his own skin.
Yeah, he's certainly keeping him close. Jim, I want to ask you about the judge in this case because there's been a lot of scrutiny for the judge. What is your perspective? Some people are even saying maybe she should recuse herself from the case.
We're talking about Judge Eileen Cannon.
Correct.
Judge Eileen Cannon is the newest, I want to say, or one of the newest judges in the Southern District of Florida. She's based normally out of the Fort Pierce area in the northern part of the district. She was appointed to the federal bench by Donald Trump. She was a big Trump supporter. There's been pictures of her online wearing Trump paraphernalia prior to her becoming judge, not since becoming judge. And it was her rulings in the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago that have caused a lot of concerns in the legal community because she initially prevented the FBI from using many of the documents until she had a special master review them herself. And that went up on appeal to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals, a conservative court, slapped her down and said that her ruling was wholly wrong, and it was very critical of how she handled the case. And so the irony of her being back in the rotation and getting this case again, you know, there may be questions as to, there's two ways this could go. She may want off the case. She may not want the additional scrutiny. And also there's the concern, if I was a Trump attorney, I'd be worried that because she was so heavily criticized for giving pro-Trump rulings previously, it's almost like working the refs. Like after you complain about their conduct so long, she may just feel she has to go harder on Trump in some of her rulings going forward. So it may be best for all concerned if a judge with no history in this case steps in, but that's a long way off. We'll see about that.
Jim DeFede, thank you for your perspective. You're watching continuing coverage of former President Donald Trump. He has arrived at the federal courthouse in downtown Miami. As you can see there, the street is completely blocked off around the courthouse. The perimeter as security is airtight, but nevertheless, there are still many pro-Trump supporters gathered outside the courthouse. Let's go now to CBS News Miami's Joan Murray for an update on what the scene is like there. Joan.
Well, Jim, the crowd has basically moved in front of the courthouse in anticipation, we believe, that they thought they might catch a glimpse of the former president. So they have moved closer to the front of the building. That is not happening at this point because we believe that the former president is going in through another entryway. I'm going to have my photographer pan around, though. The crowd has definitely gotten bigger from the last couple of hours, and you can see many of them are waving flags, red, white, and blue flags, many emblazoned with the words Trump 2024 in support of the former president as he makes an appearance here today, an historic appearance, and also to support him in his run for the presidency. As we have mentioned, people are coming from all across the country. I spoke to a gentleman from California, and he said that he has gone to Trump rallies in his home state, but this is the first time he actually jumped on a plane and came out here. He felt that he had to be here and support the former president. Also spoke to a woman from Boston again. She said she had never been to this part of Florida, but she felt it was very important to be here. Of course, there are many local people here as well. I met some supporters from Coral Springs and from Fort Lauderdale, from Miami, from Hialeah. So there are a number of local people here as well as people nationally. Now and then you'll hear a chant go up. Right now, you know, there's a man on a megaphone over there, as you see in front. Basically, they're chanting Trump, Trump, Trump. And just here they say to register their support for the former president.
Hear me or not, but I did see one lonely sign there. Someone was holding it, says Trump, quote, "You are not above the law," in that sea of Trump supporters. What are you seeing much of a presence of anti-Trump demonstrators there?
There are some, but naturally the pro-Trump supporters are here in certainly outnumbering. And as we've mentioned before, now and then there will be a little bit of, you know, I'll call it getting in the face of each other, where a group will be chanting or saying something that some of the anti-Trump people here will take issue with, and then you'll see a little bit of words. As you've been mentioning, though, the police presence is very heavy and always in the background. Whenever any of that kind of unrest moments are happening, they are there to make sure that things do not get out of hand. But for the most part, I can say that things have been fairly civil. We haven't seen anything that's too extraordinary in terms of any kind of skirmishes breaking out, and mainly, again, just a lot of very fervent supporters of the former president.
Okay.
All right, Joan Murray reporting. Thank you so much. And speaking to those anti-Trump protesters, we want to go now live to CBS News Miami's Joe Gorcho. And Joe, I understand that's the situation where you're at. There are some potential anti-Trump protesters.
Yeah, now, so, well, first off, you're not going to see me right now because our camera shot is fixed on the presence that you're seeing in front of us at the courthouse, a mixture of federal agents and city police, again, security in front of us. Then, of course, we have media contingency to our left, to our right. We have supporters of the president here behind me as well, flags waving, everyone hoping maybe to catch a glimpse of the former president as he is here, as we have learned, for his arraignment. We see some folks walking toward us now. Again, I can't really make it out too well who's walking toward us at this particular point, but again, being escorted, it looks like some media members with cameras in their hands walking toward us. Perhaps they were able to get a shot or two of some of the arrival that happened just moments ago. Again, our camera is focused on what we're seeing in front of me, which is security. I did see some detractors that were here today. One woman just walked by me with a sign saying, lock him up, and she was immediately confronted by several Trump supporters who essentially their presence convinced her to go in a different direction. That's pretty much what we've seen today, right? If there's been any detractors nearby the federal courthouse, the Trump supporters have been very vocal against them, and the detractors went into the other direction, maybe a little bit farther away than where we're situated right now, which is in front of the courthouse. As everyone's trying to catch a glimpse, there's even a child on a tree in front of me. You can't see this. Everyone's seeing if they can catch a glimpse of the former president if he were to make an appearance and wave to his supporters out here. But we don't know if that's going to happen or not. But that's the situation. Everyone here seeing if they can catch a glimpse of the former president. That's what we're kind of waiting on to see if we'll see that.
All right, Joe, thank you very much. Well, certainly one thing they are seeing is a heavy police presence. We know that the word went out to City of Miami police officers that nobody was going to get the day off today. It's all hands on deck. Let's go back out to CBS News Miami anchor Lauren Pastrana. And Lauren, paint the picture for us there. How has the scene and the mood and the atmosphere changed since we know now that the former president has in fact arrived there at the courthouse?
Well, a lot more chopper presence, that's for sure, because those are the choppers that follow the former president from Trump National in Doral on the highway all the way east here to the federal courthouse. So now we're seeing several more choppers up ahead, up above rather, but they're a couple of blocks away from us. And I was saying earlier that where we are stationed, there's actually a guard gate where cars could drive in, and we were thinking perhaps that would be where Trump and his motor entered through, but that in fact did not happen. It looks as though they came in either on the North Miami Avenue side or the Northwest First Avenue side, so they are on the other side of the building from where we are stationed right now, and that's where you're seeing these live pictures and all these people gathered outside of the courthouse. As Joe Gorcho mentioned, some people just waiting, hoping to catch a glimpse of the former president here at the federal courthouse. I can tell you one person who will very likely catch a glimpse of the former president is our own Ted Scouten, because he is inside of the courthouse right now. He will either be in the courtroom or the overflow room. We're not exactly sure, because the thing is, Ted had to give up his device, his cell phone, at 8:30 this morning per order of the court. That court order came down yesterday, basically saying if any journalist or member of the media is caught with a device that they tried to record with, they could face jail time or fines. So they had to abandon those devices. And in this day and age where we're so used to getting the very latest information up to the second on social media, we're kind of going dark here for a little bit as to exactly what's happening in these buildings behind me. But I assure you that once Ted Scouten is able to leave the courthouse, get his devices back, he will join us to give us a complete debrief of what he witnessed inside of the courtroom today. Guys?
All right, Lauren, thank you very much. And you're looking live. This is a picture, Jim DeFede tells us, on Northwest 5th Street by the guard shack. And this, again, gives you a sense of what's happening there. A lot of pro-Trump demonstrators there waving flags. And as we heard from Joan Murray there and Joe Gorcho, there is a smattering of anti-Trump demonstrators there, often getting drowned out by the pro-Trump crowd.
Yeah, but so far very peaceful, and we hope that continues to be the story throughout the day. Hours still ahead of us. But we want to break down now the charges and what they mean for the president's reelection campaign. So we will want to bring in now former federal prosecutor David Weinstein. He joins us now. David, we know that former President Donald Trump is expected to head to New Jersey, where he's expected to have a huge campaign rally, and we can only imagine that this will energize his base and his supporters.
Well, that's true. That's presuming that he's allowed to walk out of the courtroom, and I don't see any reason why they're not going to release him on conditions of bond. Remember, every defendant who makes an initial appearance, the government in all cases usually seeks what's called pretrial detention, either because you're at risk of flight or a danger to the community. Here, we've seen that he's been released on a bond up in his case in New York. Everybody knows where he's going to be and what he's going to do. It's what he says that's potentially dangerous to the community, but he'll get out on a bond. Question for me is, will he, like every defendant, both those who I've prosecuted and represented, have to surrender his passport, have his travel restricted, report to the pretrial services on a weekly, daily, monthly basis? But presuming he gets out and they agree on some sort of signature bond, he'll be campaigning around the country. I think that the judge who controls this case may enter an order restricting what he can and can't say, but in terms of his reelection campaign, it'll sort of proceed as it had all the time until he's convicted of a disqualifying offense and then elected to the office. He can continue to campaign, so that's not really going to change.
And David, as he continues to campaign, we've heard oftentimes a reference that things move very swiftly in South Florida federal court, but that may not be the case. There's also a rhetoric that the perception that Trump is going to fight every single step, tooth and nail, and essentially drag this out as long as potentially possible. What's your perspective on that?
So he is absolutely going to do that. That's been his pattern and practice in any litigation he's been involved in. Remember, in a criminal case, you have this 75-day speedy trial clock that starts ticking as soon as you're arraigned. Now, it can be told, meaning stopped and put on pause, by the judge who presides over the case for a good cause that's shown, and that is because the defense needs more time to prepare or the volume of documents is too great. It also is going to get told when they file motions to suppress, motions to dismiss, and those types of motion, which are going to potentially either keep evidence out of the trial or delay the proceedings because of the allegations that are made, those potentially are going to go up to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So then they're going to get briefed up there, and the speedy trial clock is going to continue to be told. And so while a routine case, and even a case involving a large number of documents like this, is somewhat routine here in South Florida, it could be resolved in 6 to 9 months if everything clicked along as we expected it would. But in this one, I think we're going to see a lot of pretrial delay. You also have to factor in the fact that because these charges relate to the unlawful retention of classified documents, defense documents, the defense team is going to have to be cleared to look at these documents. That means they're going to have a background check. And then they're going to have to set up a secure location somewhere for the defense to review these documents and to go over them. That's part of getting ready for this trial. So in a very long-winded way, what I'm telling you is that it's not going to be as quick as a normal case, and I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get an actual trial setting until into mid-next year. Most federal district court judges want to move their docket along, and we'll keep an eye on the parties, but this is a case unlike we've ever seen before, even given the high-profile cases down here. So this is, in fact, going to drag out well into 24 and probably come close to election time.
And I want to speak to that. First, I want to get in that we do have some breaking news. The U.S. Marshal just confirming with CBS News Miami that Trump has been processed. But just to your last point, what happens, it's the big question, if this does go into elections? Because we know that right now Trump is the Republican frontrunner.
Well, we'll have to see if he ends up being the Republican nominee, and if that's the case, this is going to be hanging over his head as he campaigns. I'm sure there'll be a lot talked about it during the course of the campaigns. But again, remember, any defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and there's nothing that prevents someone who doesn't have a disqualifying felony offense for continuing to run for office. And so it is going to linger both in the background and in the foreground, and it will be something that's continued to be talked about. But until there's a conviction, and one that's upheld on appeal, He's not a convicted felon. He's charged with some very serious felonies, and there's a lot of factual support for the charges that are contained in the indictment, but until he's convicted, it's campaigning as usual.
And David, just as a point of clarity, if he is convicted of violating the Espionage Act, would that be a disqualifying offense?
Well, there are certain portions of the Espionage Act that specifically contain a clause that says if you are convicted under this subsection, you are ineligible to hold office. The charges that were filed in this indictment, none of them contain that language. So we then are going to get into constitutional interpretation. Well, what does the Constitution say about which felony disqualifies you from holding an office? When is it final? But again, it would seem to me that he is going to be, if convicted and if the conviction is upheld on appeal, he is going to be convicted of a felony which is going to strip him of his civil rights. Now, those include the right to vote, the right to serve on a jury, the right to possess a firearm. There's going to be a lot of litigation about whether those also include the right to hold a public office.
And when we talk about this particular case, I mean, there's not really a precedent for this. So its implications are so significant because it also lays the groundwork for future incidents like this.
Well, there are other cases like this that have been filed throughout the country. Several months ago, Jack Teixeira was arrested. He's the former Massachusetts National Guardsman for having access to classified documents, taking classified documents from a place where they were kept securely, removing and possessing them, and then distributing them. Now, he hasn't even been indicted yet. I suspect they're trying to settle his charges out with a resolved plea agreement. There have been a number of other cases where former federal officers, FBI agents, federal officials have all been charged with the unlawful removal and retention of classified documents. So on that side of things, I think there's plenty of precedent about what happens to people who have been convicted. The thing that's so unusual about this is that we're talking about the former president of the United States who unlawfully removed and retained these records. And so that's what makes this such an unusual and unique type of case.
Yeah, and just to clarify, that was my follow-up with you. There is no precedent for a former president of the United States. This is United States history happening in real time. And speaking to that, Jim DeFede, I think you wanted to interject.
Yeah. David, I just want to ask you a question. A couple of things. You know, you talk about speedy trial. It's interesting how this will unfold. It is not in the president's interest to exert a speedy trial. You know, I could see him wanting to drag this out and delay this until after the election to sort of see how this plays. But assuming when we do finally get to the stage of a trial taking place, I'm curious, do you think that the trial will take place in Miami or in West Palm Beach at the federal courthouse there, since that's really the county in which the conduct was conducted? And so usually federal trials try to get as close to home as possible. But I would imagine Miami, in many ways, the Miami federal courthouse is better suited for a high-profile case like this. Any thoughts?
You're absolutely right about that, Jim. Look, this case should take place in the West Palm Beach courthouse. That's the box that was checked on the certificate of trial attorney. That's where the case was filed. I know it landed in front of Judge Cannon, who sits in Fort Pierce. But this is a case that should be tried in West Palm. They should draw a jury pool from West Palm, and everybody should show up to the courthouse in West Palm to start picking a jury and trying this case. The reality is, it's a small, older courthouse. I don't know if they're equipped up there to handle the sheer volume of both attention, security, the number of jurors that are going to have to come through there. So then that raises an even bigger question. If I'm the defendant in this case, I'm going to demand that the veneer, the jury pool, be drawn from West Palm Beach and the area that services that courthouse. I don't want to have the case in Miami and have jurors brought from Miami. That's not the venue where this occurred. That's why this case was filed in West Palm. That's why it ended up in front of Judge Cannon. So how are they going to get that jury pool down here? Are they going to put them on the Bright Line every day and bring them down? Are they going to truck them down in vans? It's going to create some serious logistics. Now, granted, if I'm the prosecution, I'm going to argue the case was filed in the Southern District of Florida. That stretches from Key West to Fort Pierce. And so the veneer or the jury pool should be drawn from the people who are in the Southern District of Florida. We can't possibly try this case in West Palm, so we're going to have to try it, you know, down here in Miami. I've been involved in cases both as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, where the case was filed in, let's say, for example, Miami. It got transferred to a judge in Fort Lauderdale, and that's where we picked the jury. That's where we tried the case, vice versa. Case was filed in front of a judge who was sitting in Fort Lauderdale. That judge then transferred down to Miami, and the case came here. It wasn't a high-profile case, and I wasn't fighting tooth and nail about where the veneer should come from, but you're right, Jim. This is a West Palm case. The jurors should come from West Palm, and the case should be tried in West Palm.
And speaking to those jurors, I know we're getting pretty far out there, but wow, finding an impartial jury in a case like this, how does political party affiliation play into it? How do you even begin to find jurors? What types of questions do you ask to find impartial jurors?
Look, you're never going to find a completely impartial juror. We've seen this happen in cases that are high profile, both within South Florida and throughout the rest of the country. The notoriety and the preconceived notion that people have about the people on both sides of the V in this case, it's clear. And so what you have to do is you're going to look for a juror who is going to be honest and upfront with you and say, yes, this is my belief, or these are my beliefs. And can I put that aside? Can I put aside those beliefs that I walked into this courtroom with about the politics, about who side I'm on, and simply listen to the evidence that's presented here in the courtroom, listen to the judge's instruction on the law, and follow the law? The issue is here, when a juror gives that answer, you have to believe them, because they're swearing to tell you the truth. Look, we saw this happen in the El Chapo case most recently. We saw some of it happen in the case involving Parkland down here, where they asked jurors, can you put it aside? Can you put aside your feelings? Can you put aside your preconceived notions? We know you have them. Those are the type of questions you're going to ask people. There are people who will say, I can't put it aside. I cannot sit on this jury because there's no way in the world, I don't care how much evidence the government would present. I am such a firm believer in the defendant, Donald Trump, in this case, that I don't care what the government says, I'm going to find him not guilty before it even starts. Well, that juror's not going to end up on this panel. Same thing goes for people on the other side. Somebody who says, I think the government is righteous in what they did, I don't care what the rest of it is, I've heard the charges in the indictment, anybody that possessed that information, and I've heard some things outside the court, I could never vote to find that person not guilty. So you're going to need to ask the type of prying questions about these people that give you the insight that will lead you to believe that one or more of them who you pick are going to just put that all aside. It's a difficult, difficult thing to have to do.
Yeah, if and when we get to that point, and that could be far down the road, as you mentioned. David Weinstein, thank you so much for your expertise here. Certainly a lot of intriguing questions, and you're right, this certainly is a case, whenever it does go to trial, that could test just the political divisions that we have seen sown here in the United States. But in the meantime, a history here coming to South Florida, and to paint the scene for you again, about an hour or so ago, the former president left his Doral Golf Resort and in a motorcade arrived at the federal courthouse in downtown Miami about 25 minutes ago. According to U.S. Marshals, the former president has been processed, and he will, we presume, soon be arraigned on those 37 counts in that indictment that was unsealed last week, accusing him of allegedly mishandling classified documents, accused of not returning those documents to the federal government, and also accused, along with an aide, Walt Nada, of trying to obstruct the investigation into trying to get those documents returned as quickly as possible. You were looking at the live picture now outside of the federal courthouse in downtown Miami, a heavy police presence. Just a moment ago, we saw the scene, Naja, of the pro-Trump demonstrators there. That there's been a big crowd out there, but so far anyway, everything has been peaceful.
All right, thank goodness, and hopefully it stays that way. We want to go now to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana, who's been out at the scene outside of the courthouse for hours now. So, Lauren, what are you seeing where you're at?
Naja, Jim, I actually have been jumping on Twitter while you all were getting that fascinating insight from David Weinstein and Jim DeFede, and here's why. I wanted to see what people were saying about being on the ground where they are, because I'm not there. I'm a couple of blocks away in a different location, but we do have crews on the ground there, and you're seeing those shots from up above, giving you an idea of just how many people are here gathered outside of the courthouse. But while I was scrolling through social media, I found some interesting information about Trump's attorney and now his spokesperson, Alina Habba, from what I'm seeing on social media, she's actually out in the crowd and giving interviews and giving some more information about today's arraignment. And earlier today, she actually spoke with CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge in an interview. This was before Trump's arraignment, and she said, of course, he is aware of the seriousness of the charges, but argued that the special counsel's team of prosecutors is applying the, quote, antiquated Espionage Act to political opponents in a way that has never been seen before. Again, I'm seeing based on social media that she was out in front of camera. She had in front of her. People were talking to her, so we're hopefully able to bring some of what she had to say and her insight from having been with the former president, presumably throughout the day today, and perhaps even yesterday as he was huddled over at Trump National Doral talking to his advisors and his supporters since he arrived here in South Florida yesterday. But here back at the courthouse, we're getting close to 3 o'clock, 2:28 right now. We were thinking that this would happen at 3. It seems as though perhaps this is ahead of schedule. We're seeing, according to the U.S. Marshals, that the former president has already been processed. We're not anticipating that the actual hearing will take too long, but again, we're not in the courthouse inside the courtroom to get those details because we can't have a camera, but of course we do have a reporter there, and our own Ted Scouten is there with a front row seat to these unprecedented proceedings, really this historic moment in the history of our country. So we will certainly be hearing from Ted Scouten as soon as he is able to come out and access his device, his cell phone again, because he had to abandon that per order of the court earlier today. But let's turn things over now to CBS News Miami's Joan Murray. She's there amongst all the Trump supporters and a few detractors who have come out here to the courthouse to make their opinions and their voices heard today. Joan?
Yeah, we were talking before about the number of people actually who were here in support of the former president, but now a couple of, I'll say a few anti-Trump people have arrived, and you can see they're standing in the middle. If you can zoom in on that, lock him up, and then there is another sign, somebody wielding a sign saying, Trump, you are not above the law. Now, at the same time, of course, the pro-Trump people are gathering around those anti-Trump people, waving their own signs. I stand with Trump. There's a lady in front of us right now saying the FBI is following Biden's instructions. So for the most part, when you see these little disagreements here, they have remained relatively civil every now and then. Maybe there'll be some shouting. We saw a number of Trump supporters going around, and they were, on a megaphone, basically shouting, we support Trump, go Brandon, pro-Trump slogans. There is another person carrying a sign there, Indict Jack Smith, the Justice Department, and then back in the way near the courthouse, a sign saying, make America safe and sane again. So as we have been reporting, as word has spread that the former president is inside the building, the crowd has basically moved closer to the front door. And we are anticipating in a little bit after the hearing, we are told that one of the former president's attorneys is supposed to come out in front and address the media. So everybody has been set up here. Now and again, some of the Trump supporters have hijacked the microphones to get out their message. But again, so this is where the center of all the action has been. Back to you.
All right, Joan, and you mentioned that microphone stand set up potentially for Trump spokesperson Alina Habba. I'm seeing through social media that she has spoken to some other outlets already. She did speak to CBS News earlier today before the arraignment proceedings to discuss the fact that she knows and that the former president understands the seriousness of this indictment and these allegations and this arraignment today, but that they are calling this, a misuse of the, quote, antiquated Espionage Act. So I'd be interested to hear what she has to say when and if she does come out and address those cameras there gathered. Let's turn things over now to CBS News Miami. Gorcho Joe, as Joan mentioned, we're seeing signs from both sides, supporters and detractors of the president. Where you are, is that what you're seeing as well?
Well, right now, I'm in the sea of Trump supporters and the media, as everyone, as you can see over my shoulder, is keeping an eye on the security presence behind me to see what will transpire in the next few moments, who will come out there. of those doors and then maybe come and approach the crowd. Some still very hopeful maybe they'll catch a glimpse of the former president. I was able to see a few detractors who were brave enough to come into the sea of Trump supporters, and immediately they were met with opposition. And supporters of Trump getting in their face, being very confrontational, both being confrontational towards each other. Verbally, though, I'll just say that. It was just verbally. But we've seen signs of lock him up, others yelling and pointing, saying Trump should be arrested, he deserves this. So that's what we've been hitting from the detractor sides. Obviously, from the Trump supporters, they're backing the former president, and we see signs of this is a witch hunt. I think we do have some sound of some folks I was able to speak with earlier today that made it, that were the detractors. One came from as far as Manhattan, others from Maryland, feeling they wanted their voice to be heard, even though they knew they would be outnumbered attending today's event.
These people are not based in reality, so their opinion doesn't matter to me. If it were me, if it were you, if it were them, they would be in jail. Nobody would be asking, what do we think and if he should be arrested? No, the person would be arrested. America says nobody's above the law. Prove it.
My own daughter and my mother, they voted for Trump. So look what I'm up against in my own household. This whole country has been brainwashed from the biggest con, and he has a cult following now. They believe his lies.
And again, that's what we're hearing from those that are against the former president, but they've been few and far between. Far more Trump supporters here. And again, they line the block. If you look over my shoulder left, you'll see some flags waving off in the distance where some more media tents are. There's media all around here. There's so many cameras, so many, from cell phones to smaller cameras, many people trying to document this little piece of history for today's federal court hearing. And again, many gathered here right by this police tape here positioned in front of me, seeing if perhaps they'll catch a glimpse of the former president. But strong feelings truly on both sides, whether you support the former president against this indictment or you're ones that are the detractors against the former president and thinking he should be arrested and face these charges. Lauren?
Yeah, Joe, this is Naja. I have a question for you. Yeah, certainly compelling sound. I mean, for the first time, we're hearing from those anti-Trump protesters. The big concern, of course, would be that pro-Trump and anti-Trump protesters could essentially clash, creating an elevated situation. And there's been a lot of scrutiny about what seems to be scaled back protection. Do you feel safe out there? Is this what you expected to see covering this?
I think it's been relatively calm. You would expect people on the opposite sides who have different beliefs when it comes to this case not to agree, but I haven't seen anything that's risen to a level of anyone should be fearing for their safety. It's been very calm, mostly supporters, relaxed. Sure, there's been some moments of tense exchange with words, but nothing to the level where you would feel unsafe. Most people here have just been very relaxed. Some actually very positive as they cheer on the president against this indictment. So no, I think from a safety standpoint, we know there are detectives that are in plain street clothing. Keep an eye on this. We see the City of Miami Police patrolling. We see other federal agents. So there's enough security. There's not enough concern from law enforcement now to do anything else than what they're doing. So Naja, to answer your question, everything's very relaxed, very calm, as people just want to catch a glimpse of the former president perhaps and show their support. But truly not much of a clashing variety, just a few verbal exchanges here and there between those, again, detractors and the supporters.
Hey, Joe, this is Jim Barry. You know, you listen to some of these comments and you wonder how and when can we find common ground again in this country. It certainly makes you wonder that. I also would like you, if you could tell us if you have a sense of where these folks are from. Do you sense there are a lot of people here who actually are from South Florida who came out to join this protest one way or the other, or if most of the people whom you're interacting with are from out of town?
I think it's a mix. One of the people you just heard from there, the elderly lady that you saw there in the interview, she's from Maryland. Another one we spoke to, she's from Manhattan. Some are from right here in Miami, some from other parts of South Florida. So I think you do have a blend in terms of whom we've been able to speak with today, Jim. But you have folks from all over wanting to catch a glimpse from history, whether they're from the backyard here in Miami by the courthouse, or say they're farther up north in Florida or from a different part of the country altogether. But they're here to catch a glimpse of history and, again, either offer their support or voice their concerns against the former president.
right, CBS News Miami's Joe Gorcho reporting live. Thank you for that report. And we want to go back out to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana. And Lauren, I know that you're a couple of blocks away from the scene, but you have been closely monitoring social media. Our own Jim DeFede mentioned earlier that he heard sort of a new rhetoric online where Trump supporters were saying, don't go to the location because essentially that this could be a ploy to arrest you. What types of things are you seeing on social media?
Yeah, I've heard some rumblings about things like that. People saying, stay away. This is just what the deep us to get involved with, to distract us. That's, you know, on one side of social media. Another aspect that I'm wondering if it played a role in the turnout here today, and even just seeing the crowds, people aren't really bunched up on top of each other. It is very hot. The National Weather Service was saying that the feels-like temperatures were going to be about 100 degrees. So we are certainly feeling that out here, and we are covered by a tent, and we are far away from the large crowds. But I imagine over by the courthouse with so many people in close contact with one another, it's hot, they're getting tired. So perhaps that also had an impact on the crowds, and perhaps also people thought, hey, this is going to happen at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in South Florida in the summer. It's going to rain, so let's, you know, avoid that area if we can, because it was going to be a mess. Of course, right now we're still seeing blue skies, but you know that could turn on a dime, especially with South Florida weather in the summertime. So perhaps all those things sort of played a role in why we're seeing the crowd that we're seeing, which is not small by any stretch of the imagination. There are lots of people out there on both sides who want to express their opinions and let people know how they're feeling about what is happening inside of this courtroom. And we are told that it is happening right now. Our Ted Scouten has now moved into the courtroom for the official arraignment proceedings. And if what reality is mirrors what we have been reporting and what we've been hearing, this could be very quick. So it could be within the next half hour or so that we are seeing the former president, or at least his motorcade. Perhaps we won't see him in the flesh, but we will see that vehicle movement once again to start making their way back west, away from the courthouse, to perhaps to another stop, or perhaps straight to the airport. We, of course, are going to continue to monitor that, but I'm really interested in hearing from Ted Scouten once he is able to leave the courtroom, because he is really our only reporter with eyes and ears there to give us that firsthand account of how the former president was acting. Did he look happy? Did he look sad? Was he reserved? Was he boisterous? Just sort of give us that picture. Did he say much, or is he just really going in there to say not guilty and that's it? We are really waiting for that information, just like I'm seeing a lot of people on social media are waiting. A lot of people curious as to why they haven't seen anything yet. But again, this is federal court, so no cameras allowed in the courtroom. I'd also be interested to see those sketches that are come from those talented courtroom sketch artists. We're hopefully going to see those a little bit later on this evening, so we could then put an image to what Ted Scouten will eventually describe for us, guys.
Yeah, that will be interesting to see, Lauren. You're right. Thank you so much. And of course, in a brief interview clip that we heard from the former president, which I believe occurred last night, he was asked exactly what he would say in court, and he said, well, not much. I'll just say not guilty and kind of keep it moving. Let's go back to our own CBS News Miami's Jim DeFede. And Jim, you've looked at this whole thing unfold here, and we heard one thing that was apparently put out by Elena Hava, who you mentioned is his New York attorney, and we expect to hear from her at some point here. And she is suggesting that maybe this is a situation where an antiquated standard has been applied for the Espionage Act. Is there such a thing as an antiquated standard?
I'm not sure. I think you're going to hear a lot of arguments. I think there's a lot of areas where the Trump legal team will try to challenge. Calling the statute antiquated isn't actually a legal argument. That's just a way of trying to suggest that the charges themselves are inappropriate. But no, this is, one of the things that I think we should note is the fact that this hearing is taking place in Miami and not Washington, D.C. If you remember, the grand jury in this case heard most of the testimony in Washington, D.C. And people thought that that was where the case was going to be brought, because anytime you bring a conspiracy case and involving a former president or any of these sorts of issues that you're sort of seeing, Washington could act as the venue. But I think Jack Smith, the special counsel, was very smart in moving it to Miami, because he would have been accused of trying to find a venue that was most favorable for prosecutors. In other words, if the trial had taken place in Washington, D.C., I think 96% of the people in Washington, D.C. voted for Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not popular in the Washington, D.C. area. That jury pool would have been filled with people who have disdain for the former president. By bringing it to Miami, which was the appropriate venue to bring it to. So he was right about that. But it's also riskier for him as a prosecutor, you know, because you have a jury pool now being drawn from South Florida, you know, whether it's West Palm or whether it's Miami-Dade, you know, Donald Trump.
It's a red state.
It's a red state. And so, you know, if you want to accuse Jack Smith of being unfair, you know, you also have to look at the record. And the fact that he chose to bring it here suggests that he is trying to play by the rules, trying to give the president, the former president, a fair standard. I realize that the former president will never acknowledge that. His supporters will never acknowledge that. But I think for the public at large, they should be heartened by that fact.
All right, we want to go back out to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana. She has an update for us. And Lauren, I understand that there's potentially a post on social media from the former president.
Yeah, it looks like he posted while he was on his way to the courthouse on his Truth Social platform. 57 minutes ago, he posted in all caps, "On my way to courthouse, witch hunt, MAGA, make America great again." Just before that, he put, "One of the saddest days in the history of our country. We are a nation in decline." And then shortly before that, he actually posted about Live Golf and the PGA Tour. So even though this is a truly historic and a major moment in his life and his career and potentially the implications that it could have on him, he was also thinking about golf in that moment while he was over at Trump National Doral. So just an interesting juxtaposition that he went from a very long post about the golfers and then went into talking about his case, or very, you know, restricted what he could say, but he did touch on it, that he was on his way to the courthouse, once again calling this a witch hunt, which is a refrain we have heard from him many, many times. We understand, based on the reporting from CBS News, that he arrived and was inside the courthouse before 2 p.m., so arrived pretty early. He left at about 1:30, so made good time from Trump National Doral, and he was processed by about 2:15, according to the U.S. Marshals. Again, then the crews, everyone who was waiting, the journalists who were gathered, and other people who were there for this arraignment hearing were able to go into the courtroom just a short time ago. CBS News Miami's Ted Scouten is there. He's going to be our eyes and ears and give us all the information of what exactly happens in the courtroom. But those were the messages from the former president before he went into the courtroom. I'm curious to see if he quickly posts something to Truth Social once he leaves the courthouse in just a little while, because we're not anticipating that this will take very long.
Really interesting, Lauren, because I think a lot of us were anxious to see sort of what would be his demeanor or his temperament. Would we see a more humble Trump? And so I think that really speaks to sort of his tone and what we will likely see him carry into his big next event, his big campaign in New Jersey. I think that also speaks.
Let me just sort of jump in. By the way, it's interesting. You're not seeing the president live post on Truth Social from the courthouse, because the restriction on having cell phones applies to him.
Yeah, good point.
He can't do anything on social media until he leaves. So I think that'll be probably the first sign that we have that he's on his way out, is when they give him back his phone and he gets in the car before he pulls out.
And we know he loves to head to social media first. That's sort of where his base knows they can find his authentic message. I guess moving forward, Jim, what do you expect to happen at this campaign rally in New Jersey?
Oh, I think you're going to hear a full-throated attack on the federal government, the familiar refrain of how the Justice Department has been weaponized. But more importantly, the argument that Donald Trump wants to make politically is that, again, this isn't about me, this is about all of you. They're coming at me because I represent you. That's a powerful message, and that's been a very successful message for him during this time. And so I would expect a lot of that, along with, I need your support, I need your help, please donate to my campaign.
And we are looking live right now at the scene outside of the federal courthouse in downtown Miami. Former President Donald Trump still inside the courthouse. We're not certain when he might leave. We expect that it will be fairly soon. He arrived there just before 2 p.m. U.S. Marshals have told us that he has been processed and officially arrested. We're not certain if the arraignment hearing has occurred just yet, but as we've heard time and again, that process will not take long. We do expect the former president, of course, to plead not guilty, and then he'll be on his way. We're not certain if he's going to make any unscheduled stops here in South Florida before heading to the airport, but we do know he does plan to fly out and, as you mentioned, Naja, head back to Bedminster, New Jersey for that big campaign rally tonight. We're looking at some signs outside the courthouse, pro and anti Donald Trump protesters there. Certainly more pro-Trump supporters there, certainly outnumbering those who are detractors of the former president.
And so far this has been very peaceful, and hopefully it stays that way. Jim, I want to talk about last night, because we know before all of this last night, Trump was at his Doral resort and had dinners with his attorney. What is the conversation they had? If only we could have been a fly on the wall, right? What advice, what was the tone of the conversation?
Well, it's our understanding that what he has been focused on is trying to figure out how to hire local counsel, how to add to his defense team. I'm sure his attorneys would have also gone through with him, walked him through exactly what was going to happen the next day. You know, but it's more of the mechanics of what happens next. I think that's really what Trump is focused on. Look, as much as this may benefit Trump politically, Donald Trump did not want to be the first president to face a former president to face a federal indictment. This is a stain, this is a blemish, but more importantly, this is a case that could send him to prison. Again, I'm not trying to downplay the New York case. There's a lot of discussion and debate as to whether or not those charges are appropriate. I think that that's going to be something that's going to be interesting for the courts to review, whether or not New York overstepped its bounds with its criminal charges. These charges, though, these are deathly serious charges for the former president, and I think that thought that he could end up in prison and spend his final years in custody. You know, you have folks deciding whether or not they being asked, would you pardon him if you're elected president? So far, Ron DeSantis has not said if he would pardon him. The couple other candidates,
pardon himself if he gets elected.
Well, a couple other candidates have said that they would pardon him. So this will be one of those interesting things. But to the politics of it, it really does freeze his opponents. You know, only Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson have come out and really said that the president should step down, former president should step aside because of this. Everyone else is staying fairly quiet.
And we know that one of the reasons they're doing that is because they don't want to disenfranchise his base, obviously. So we'll see how that unfolds. It is still early in the political campaign season. There are a lot of Republican presidential candidates out there right now. Obviously, Donald Trump is clearly the front runner right now. We'll see where that goes. And to your point, Jim, about this case, we know this isn't the only case that the president may face, because they're still investigating his alleged interference in the 2020 election in the state of Georgia. And of course, there's still an ongoing probe about his role in the January 6th events at the Capitol. Let's go back to David Weinstein. And David, I understand you want to talk a little bit more about the Espionage Act and exactly how that applies in this case and just how serious it is.
Look, I'm going to take issue with somebody saying it's antiquated. As Jim pointed out, it's an older statute written in 1940, but it's been amended and revised as recently as 1996. And again, it's not about what everybody thinks about when you hear espionage, secret meetings, mail drops, encrypted documents, whatever. It's about, in this instance, the unlawful retention of classified documents that affect the defense and military secrets and capabilities of this country. So again, I think it's a tactic used by the defense here to sort of draw the attention away from it. They're going to try and attack it, but it's not necessarily antiquated. It's some serious allegations here that go to the heart of the national security of the country. And, you know, as far as how long it's going to take in the courtroom, I don't think it'll actually happen, but if a defendant wants, he's entitled to make the magistrate judge read every single thing in the indictment. I don't think that the former president wants to hear it all read aloud again. And he wants to get out and he's got some place to go. But, you know, the judge will ask whether or not you've been given a copy of the indictment, whether you've read through it with your lawyers, and before you enter your plea of not guilty, do you want to have it read? I don't see them reading it to him. The other thing is, are they going to release everybody from where they're sitting when the president's done, or are they going to wait till they arraign his co-defendant, Nauta? Again, normally you do them one after the other because they're independent people. Because of the security, are they going to stop? They're going to let the president out and then go on to an audit and see? Haven't seen anything indicating he's got permanent counsel of record, so he may need more time to get a lawyer. So his arraignment is also potentially one that's going to take place today. So, you know, while things move fast in federal court, yes, this could be over in 15 minutes. It could also take, you know, an hour or so before it's over and we see anybody leaving the courtroom.
You know, Trump exists in these legal entanglements. We know that. But do you think that he grasps the gravity of this particular situation?
Having seen what took place during his initial appearance and arraignment on the state charges in New York and then his subsequent appearance there where they set it all for trial, I don't think he's accustomed to being in the courtroom and not being in charge. In civil cases, he doesn't have to show up. And so it doesn't really hit him. I mean, the gravity of this, it has to hit any defendant when you look at the sheer number of years you might potentially be facing. If you're convicted on all this and you got the statutory max and they ran it consecutive 400 years. I mean, this is some heavy, heavy charges that are pending against him. He doesn't seem to grasp the gravity of anything that takes place. But again, is this going to be a wake-up for him to realize that this is the force of the entire federal government now coming against him and the charges that were filed? I'm not sure he does recognize that.
Well, his former Attorney General Bill Barr said if even half of this is true, in Barr's words, quote, he's toast. And there are 37 charges here. 31 of them are similar. The other 6 vary. In your judgment, David, I'm sure you've looked at the indictment. What are the most serious charges that he faces here? Well,
the most serious charges are the ones relating to the retention of the documents, the first 1 through 31. 31, yeah. The other 6, they're serious because they're an affront to the system that at least I'm a part of. It's all about what takes place in the system and how honest you are with the people in the system. And those other charges relate to obstructing an investigation, of allegations of making false statements. So those are serious in their own way, but the most serious are those first through 37. And if you look at them, about half of them relate to the documents, or maybe a little bit less, that were taken after they executed the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. And that's significant because any motion to suppress that's filed as to the documents seized after the execution of the search warrant, that's only going to affect those documents. The other documents were the documents that were turned over after they made their first request, and it took so long for them to return them, and that, in fact, he had held on to, allegedly, since the time he left office in January. So that's an interesting division between the two different sets of charges there. They'll all be subject to some motion for overreach, for indiscretion, for improper use of the Presidential Records Act, and things of that nature. But it's interesting to note that not all of them were documents that were seized from Mar-a-Lago.
And David, hold that thought because I have a couple follow-up questions, but we want to go out now to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana because she has some brand new details just in from the courtroom. Lauren, what have you learned?
That's right, guys. We've learned at this hour that former President Trump is now officially in the courtroom for the arraignment proceedings. We're also being told that Jack Smith, the special counsel in this classified documents case, is sitting front row. Unclear just how many people. I imagine it's quite full. I do know that there is an overflow room as well, but we are waiting to get the details of exactly what goes down in the courtroom as soon as our own CBS News Miami's Ted Scouten is able to leave the courtroom. As we mentioned earlier, former President Trump was able to post to social media before going courtroom, and we think a good indicator when he leaves the courtroom is perhaps when he might be active on social media, again, specifically on Truth Social. So I'm also monitoring that as well, but it appears as though he just went into the courtroom within the last 5 or 10 minutes or so. I want to bring in CBS News Miami's Larry Seward now because I'm very curious to know how all these people on the ground right now with no eyes and ears inside of the courtroom are getting information. Larry, are you hearing anything from anyone there as far as, are they following along somewhere to find out exactly the status and to know that the former president is now officially in the courtroom? Or are they just really there to sort of have fellowship with one another and to be with like-minded people, perhaps?
Yeah, they're mostly here for each other at this point. I don't see anyone that's trying to track what's happening inside the courtroom, but there are 3 groups of supporters for the former president. I want to show you at least one of them there in the distance. You can see a collection of flags there. That is one group. That's probably 40 people at least that are huddled there on that corner and have been for the last hour. Now, the second, it's actually rolling toward you. You can look at these vehicles. A lot of them have signs representing some sort of political statement. We're going to be careful about what we show because some of them are rather vulgar, but you can see the flags. Some of these people have been circling the block around the federal courthouse for at least the hour and a half that I have been here. If you look across the street, there are members of the Miami Police Department. We see them on all corners here. We're at North Miami and North 5th Street. If you follow me, I want to show you the third group that I'm talking about, and you can see them here. This is on the east side of the federal courthouse. You can see we're going to have to be careful of some of these flags here, but there's a pretty large gathering. I believe our Joan Murray is down in here somewhere, but these people have come from across the country in some cases just to be here for this hearing. As I told you, I haven't seen people on their phones perhaps checking for what is happening in the courtroom, but a lot of people, including some passerbys here with their cell phones out. You can see snapping pictures. You can see some of them recording the group, others recording the media gathering, others are taking selfies. We'll encounter some people who walk along who express words of support for the former president, discussed with the indictment and how they feel that this should not be the case and the former president should be freed. Of course, we'll see how this plays out as the former president is in the courtroom, as Lauren just told us moments ago, and when he leaves, what the reaction may be. But this crowd has been pretty steady in this size since we've been here. And again, the number of people that are just driving by has been sort of surprising because these people are not just on their way somewhere and passing by to honk the horn a few times. There are people that are circling and circling at least for over an hour. We'll send it back to you, Lauren.
And Larry, I'm sure you could hear from where you are as well. The choppers have once again picked up, perhaps in anticipation for this motorcade, perhaps leaving in the next few minutes or so as soon as this arraignment hearing wraps up. Looks like they will be following the former president to whatever his next destination might be. We do know that he is planning to leave South Florida rather quickly. Whether he makes a stop along the way, of course, we will be keeping an eye on that to see exactly where he goes. We know that Trump is in the courtroom. We know that special counsel Jack Smith is in the courtroom. And before this arraignment, several days ago when this indictment originally came down, Jack Smith said he did make a brief statement. He basically said, we have one set of laws in this country. They apply to everyone. Adhering to and applying the laws is what determines the outcome of an investigation, nothing more, nothing less. And then the special counsel's office basically said, we're not going to comment beyond that. So we're not anticipating, perhaps they will prove us wrong, but based on what they said a couple of days ago, it doesn't look like anyone from Jack Smith's team will be speaking out after this arraignment. But we do have some very new information, new insight from Trump's attorney. I believe it's Alina Habba, and she was outside amongst the crowd as the arraignment was getting underway to give her insight. Let's see what she had to say.
Today is not about President Donald J. Trump, who is defiant. It is not about the Republican Party. It is not about the 2024 election. It is about the destruction of the long-standing American principles that have set this country apart for so long. In recent years, we have seen the rise of politically motivated prosecutors who don't care for impartiality, who don't care for due process or equal protection of laws. They have been quietly but aggressively cultivating a two-tiered system of justice where selective treatment is the norm. From the Russia hoax to the attorney generals to the corrupt DAs in Georgia and New York, and now this. The people in charge of this country do not love America. They hate Donald Trump.
All right, it seems like that's what we have from Alina Habba. I'm sorry, guys, I'm not sure if you're trying to talk and I can't hear you just yet, but interesting to hear from her that she says that this is not about Donald Trump. And from so many of his supporters, that's really what we've been hearing, that this isn't about him, that this is about them, the American people, and that they feel that this isn't just an attack on the former president, even though he is the one facing the slew of charges. They feel as though it is an attack on them and their rights as American citizens to vote who they want to vote for, support who they want to support, believe what they want to believe. So they are truly taking this very personally, and I think that's the message that Alina Habba was issuing and conveying as she spoke outside of the courtroom just a short time ago. Interesting, though, that it seems as though, because this was taped playback, so she spoke a few minutes ago, that she likely spoke before the actual arraignment proceedings actually happened. So I'd be interested to see if anyone speaks after, if we will see the former president make any sort of appearance or acknowledgement of all the people gathered. So we'll certainly be waiting here at the courthouse to see what happens after this arraignment wraps up.
Lauren, potentially the first time that we're hearing a sort of tone or strategy from Trump's attorney. So I want to bring back in now David Weinstein. Let's talk about this, because the indictment is pretty cut and dry, David. I mean, it lays it out. And so there was sort of a tone of what possibly could the defense, what stance could they take? Does this give us a sort of roadmap for the route that they might go? And a follow-up to that, it almost seems to muddle the issue, because right, the two can be separate. There could be a witch hunt, and these also could be legitimate issues.
I think it just muddles the issues here. It's not about love or hate or about the way the system is being politicized against somebody else. It's about the facts that are contained in the indictment, what the law is with regard to the use and retention and transportation of documents that have classification markings on them, about statements that you're making when you're asked to return them, whether they're true or false, about certifications that are created. I think it's just rhetoric, what we just heard from that person who was talking about what supposedly is going on here. In terms of their defense, they've certainly telegraphed it through other statements. They're going to attack this prosecution as one that simply didn't give the former president enough time to get the documents back or to review them. They'll talk and focus on the Presidential Records Act, on the fact that a former president is entitled time to review the documents that he has to make sure that they are not personal versus presidential records, and that primarily that's what he was doing, but he didn't go about it the right way. So the government's going to then confront that with, well, that's not the way the process is supposed to work. You didn't ask us to set up a secure facility to put these documents in. You took them and put them in boxes, and we have documented photos of that and witnesses of that, and you put them in a non-secured location. So that's going to be part of what they're doing. As far as overreach and what they're talking about, politicization of this, they're going to talk about the initial grand jury investigation that started up in Washington, D.C. Was there really a reason to do that? Was it based on something that the archives had told them about, or was it based on something that was nothing to do with that, that's not based in fact? And those are the kinds of motions to dismiss, and then from there they'll seek to weave those into their motions to suppress. You can see their tactics and what stance and position they're going to take from the pleadings that they filed in the parallel case that was attached after the search warrant was executed. But the words that we just heard from the attorney standing outside the courthouse, those are nothing more than, to me, rhetoric to inflame the people who support the former president. It's really got nothing to do with the law, the facts, and the way we litigate cases here in the U.S.
Yeah, and David, I think you're right. It's an important distinction you make, because the court of public opinion argument is from the former president is that, quote unquote, I guess they're picking on me. But that certainly won't be an argument that can be made illegally in this case. And to clarify what you said, you're right. This has actually been a 2-year odyssey between the former president and the National Archives as they tried repeatedly, according to the indictment, to get these documents back. And the president continually resisted. And then when they actually went in, the FBI, and discovered these documents, 100 more boxes were found. 15 boxes, according to the indictment, were returned initially. 100 more were discovered. And when they went through those documents, that's when they discovered just how sensitive some of this information was.
Well, Jim, David, let me just sort of jump in. Let's be real clear about this. This is about what the president did, right, and what his actual actions, and his actions as laid out in the indictment, and the government will have to prove what they say in the indictment, goes against what Alina Habba just said there. Because what they are saying is that he actively, not just inadvertently, not just casually, not just was waiting for more time, that he actively engaged in obstruction by conspiring with his attorneys, by conspiring with others to hide these documents, to provide false testimony to federal officials. Those are the actions that he has landed him in the position he's in now. When you talk about the case involving Mike Pence and the documents that he had that were turned over, the Joe Biden, which has now been closed because they found it was inadvertent and that he immediately cooperated. Joe Biden, there's still a prosecutor reviewing that case, but it appears to be the same sort of ilk as Pence. What Donald Trump did was so radically different. I understand the whataboutism and the false equivalency that Trump supporters will try to do and his attorneys will do, and that's their right to try to make that case. But it's the former president's actions, his steps that he took, that landed him in that courtroom today.
And speaking to that, let's go back out now to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana on the ground. Lauren?
All right, Naja and Jim, we've got that breaking news. You see it there at the bottom of your screen. Official Trump has pleaded not guilty and asked for a jury trial. We are being told that court is now letting out. Our Joe Gorcho says that he spotted a few reporters running out of the courthouse, perhaps to get into position so they could start to describe exactly what they saw and heard inside of the courtroom for this arraignment. Ted Scouten was in there. We are waiting to hear from him to get the very latest on exactly what was said, what Trump's demeanor was, how he behaved, and whether anything else was said in the courtroom. As we reported just a short time ago, we know the special counsel, Jack Smith, was in the front row. We are not anticipating to hear from him or his team today. We just heard from Trump's attorney and spokesperson, so we don't think that we're going to hear from anyone else as they are leaving the courthouse, and it still remains to be seen whether we will even catch a glimpse of the former president as he exits the courthouse complex. Let's bring in Joan Murray now, who is there in front of the Wilkie D. Ferguson courthouse. Joan, are people hearing that court is over and that Trump has officially pleaded not guilty?
Yeah, if you can hear me, Lauren.
We can.
So where I am standing, a short time ago, there was a huge crowd in front. That crowd is dispersed. It is quite hot out here. The sun's been beating down, so some of the supporters have moved about into more shady areas. As you can see, there is a microphone set up in front here in anticipation that somebody with the Trump team will be coming out to speak. But so far, we haven't seen any sign of that. Again, much less of a crowd now right here in front of the main entrance to the courthouse. Some supporters still here. We don't see as many flag waving over there. If I could have my photographer move over there. Still, you see the people with the flags, Trump 2024, in support of the former president. They were all hoping to get a glimpse of the former president at this particular venue. We do not believe that is going to happen. Once again, the crowd has dispersed in this main area, moving to get some relief from the sun, but they are gathered in other areas. Some people still on megaphones shouting slogans in support of the former president. Lauren?
All right, Joan, interesting that you mentioned the heat because it really is starting to feel extra hot out here as the sun beats down, especially on a lot of these people who've been out here for hours. So perhaps now learning that the official not guilty plea has been entered, they're feeling that they could sort of take a break from some of their rallying and protesting. And I am seeing as well that a lot of these streets are appearing to have been reopened. Perhaps they'll close them again as the motorcade does begin its departure from the courthouse to expectedly the airport later on, maybe with a stop along the way. We, of course, are going to stay on top of that. But I know that earlier Naja had asked Joe whether he felt safe, and where he was in the thick of it all. And he said he did feel safe. I believe that where Joan is, the picture that we're getting, it doesn't seem like it's overly crowded. And where I am, it's not crowded at all. In fact, people are going about their regular every day. People are going to the coffee window not too far from where I'm standing. Traffic is moving a few blocks in front of me as if nothing is happening. I've seen people walking their dogs, people hanging out with their kids. In fact, there's a big crypto bull type statue here in downtown Miami, and it's just being washed as if this is just another day in the neighborhood. So people are going about their regular business despite the historic moment that is happening just about a block away from us. Let's bring in Joe Gorcho now. I believe he's ready. And Joe, I think it was you who mentioned that you saw some reporters or some people running out of the courthouse. I'm not sure if they were from the overflow room or from the actual courtroom, but have you been able to get in contact with them, and what did they say?
Yeah, so I just saw them. It's reporters from all sorts of networks in the country. Appearances are right now. Sense was of run is that court was out. Again, that's just me overhearing and seeing a bunch of reporters leaving the courthouse and the expression that it's coming to get in front. So I'm hearing now. It could the portion and maybe the left, and we're obviously not inside the court. That's just the sense I got because there's from about 7 or 8 papers, Naja, out of
some trouble with your audio, so it's difficult to hear you and see what you are trying to say, Joe. So we're going to toss things back over to the anchors in the studio. Perhaps from their bird's eye view, they can see all the different monitors. My monitor is very small, so I can't see whether there's any activity over where the motorcade might be leaving very soon. Jim, Naja, what are you seeing there from the studio?
Cycles all lined up, and it's been like that for a little over an hour now, Lauren, quite honestly. Very still outside of the federal courthouse there. We do have word that, as you guys have reported, that the court proceedings are indeed over. And as you mentioned, the former president pled not guilty, is asked for a jury trial. And so those are the latest developments that we are getting from inside the courtroom. And of course, as Lauren mentioned, CBS News Miami's Ted Scouten was our reporter inside the courtroom there for those proceedings, and so we await to hear exactly his account of how things unfolded in the courtroom.
Yeah, it will be really interesting to see all that unfold because cameras weren't allowed, and so this will be the first time that we're hearing a first-hand account of actually learning about the president's demeanor. We know that he had been vocal leading up to this, saying that he was just going to walk in and say not guilty, and according to all reports, that's exactly what he did as he went in and surrendered himself. And you know, Lauren was alluding business as usual in Miami, which speaks to South Florida, right? Because this is not business as usual. This is monumental. This is United States history in the making. And we have so many layers of elements that can contribute. We've heard our reporters talk about the heat and humidity. We're also in the rainy season now, so we know that at any moment it could essentially start to monsoon. But by all accounts, protests have been very peaceful. We've heard from people both for and against Trump. And for the first time, we're also hearing from Trump's attorney and gaining new insight into what their supposed strategy might be. You know, we know this indictment is very cut and dry, so it has been interesting to hear sort of the tone that they will take, and we're continuing to hear, Jim, that rhetoric, Jim DeFede, of sort of this witch hunt. We've been talking about this sort of court of opinion and the court of law, and I think it's really important as we cover the situation not to muddle the two because they're distinctly different.
Sure, and just so you know what you're looking at right now, that's the north end of the Wilkie Ferguson building. That area right there is where you can go into the underground. We would expect that is where Trump's motorcade went in and where it will then exit. That's why we're keeping an eye on that shot, is because that's the underground entrance into the building in which the former president just pled not guilty. So no, you know, this case, it touches all of the nerves in this country politically. There are those who have tremendous disdain for the former president and those who have tremendous love. We are a divided country. There's little doubt about that. And this case has a way of playing right to those fault lines. And that's what makes this case so dangerous on so many levels. You know, and the rhetoric around the case, I really hope that people are very cautious. I understand mounting a strong defense for Donald Trump and for Donald Trump to want to defend himself. But when you start talking about politically motivated prosecutions and two-tier systems of justice and saying that everything is rigged, we have seen there was a member of Congress, a current member of Congress, who tweeted out after the indictment, "This is war." You know, that sort of rhetoric in a post-January 6th world is dangerous. I'm glad everything went smoothly in Miami. I give credit to the Miami police chief, Manny Morales, the city of Miami, Miami-Dade PD, the federal law enforcement who clearly did a good job and have handled themselves well, and credit to the citizens of Miami, those who came out to express their views. But, you know, we're just at the very beginning of this. This is not the end by any means.
Absolutely. And as we keep a close eye on that entrance, Jim, we'll see if and when there is a motorcade that leaves. You know, I think a lot of people who have been looking at this case from a distance, lay people I'm speaking about, Jim, are trying to grasp exactly what this case is all about. Of course, the former president said, hey, look, I had some documents, big deal. Other former politicians have had documents. The current president, Joe Biden, had a whole range of documents at his house. The former vice president, Mike Pence, had documents at his place. They weren't prosecuted. So speak to the layperson to help them understand why this could be so important.
So let's start with why this is an important case, as opposed to getting into, which we've discussed a little bit, about why this is different than the case involving Mike Pence or Joe Biden. The fact that Donald Trump, you know, where those cases may have been inadvertent, or as soon as they learned that they had the documents, immediately turned them back into the National Archive and turned them over to federal officials, didn't need to have subpoenas, and those sorts of issues arise, whereas the former president dragged this out for 2 years. Yep. What's significant about this, and Jack Smith, the prosecutor in the case, talked about it in his very brief comments. He talked about how these are documents that are protected because they put lives at risk if they get out. That you're talking about particularly men and women in the military who are on the front lines, who are dealing with threats abroad. When you release records and when you potentially let out this type of information, the nuclear secrets of our friends and opponents, the plans for invasion or going to war with Iran, when you start having those records handled in an inappropriate way. And let's remember, one of the most damning pieces of evidence against the former president is a tape recording where he allegedly is waving the documents around, showing them to 2 writers who are working on a book for Mark Meadows, his former chief of staff, and they were interviewing Donald Trump, and he's saying, well, look at this. And why? Because he was aggrieved over something that the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, or the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, said critical of Donald Trump. And so Donald Trump wanted to prove that Mark Milley was wrong and started showing battle plans. You know, that, oh, look, they drafted the documents to go to war with Iran. This stuff is not supposed to be casually discussed in that circuit, and lives are at risk as a result. That's why this is serious.
And also speaking to our ability as a nation to protect our allies and people who want to do business with us in the future, right? I mean, what does it say? Some
of the documents were marked Five Eyes only. Five Eyes are our 5 closest intelligence allies: United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, I think and the United States. Those are the 5 Eyes. Those 5 countries share massive amounts of intelligence. And if those other countries, if Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand think that documents that they help provide are not secure, they may not want to continue to cooperate with the United States in sharing documents. That's why this case is so serious, and that's why federal prosecutors like Jack Smith, who is a Republican appointed, to oversee this case, has dealt with it in the manner that he has.
And interesting, we'll see if and when, Jim, that becomes a political flashpoint for amongst the other Republican presidential contenders, because some have come out and said, as Naja pointed out about an hour ago, that their tone is changing, and even those who initially wanted to defend the former president are now suggesting that, you know what, maybe this behavior was reckless, careless, and outright dangerous. I'll tell
you who's having the biggest effect: Bill Barr. Bill Barr was among those who, in the New York case, said this is a garbage case. Others came out. Alan Dershowitz, very pro-Trump, said the New York case, not a good case. They have all come out and said, this is a real case, this is a serious case. As you mentioned earlier, Bill Barr said if even half what's in this indictment is proven true, the former president is toast. I think, a lot of Democrats don't like Bill Barr, but a lot of Republicans do. And the fact that he has been so vociferous on Fox, one of the few voices that's willing to come on and be candid and truthful with that audience, is very critical.
Jim, very quickly, why haven't we heard from a lot of Democrats?
I think they right now don't want to politicize it, so they're not. I will tell you, I was told we were trying to get some Democratic members of Congress to comment, and we heard that the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, was telling Democrats, don't comment. Stay quiet. Let this case sort of play out, right? Or at least for now, that there is no reason to make it super partisan on the part of Democrats attacking the president. Let the document, the indictment, speak for itself. You know, sometimes prosecutors will put an indictment together that is bare bones and doesn't say a lot. This is what's known as a speaking indictment. This indictment, Jack Smith knew that he wasn't going to answer a lot of questions at a press conference or any questions at a press conference. So he put together an indictment that included photos, that included a lot of material, a lot of information, because he knew there would be the skeptics, there would be those who would never believe anything, but at least allows others to read it for themselves. And I would encourage people, it's available online. It's available at cbsmiami.com. Read the indictment. It's 40 some odd pages, 49 pages. Yeah. It's a story.
It is a story. Yeah. And its emphasis is on national security, which is really interesting. Not on Trump or the witch hunt, but on national security. Let's go back out to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana. Lauren, what's happening where you're at?
Naja, Jim, and Jim DeFede, just an update to our earlier reporting for some clarification. It appears as though the proceedings and the initial court hearing are still happening, but what we saw earlier with the rush of other journalists coming out was perhaps just the wave in the overflow room, or who were getting word of what was happening in the courtroom and then needed to run out to file in order to make deadline to get the information out as quickly as possible that the former president had in fact pleaded not guilty and that he had asked for a jury trial. So our understanding as of right now is that there is actually still activity happening in the courtroom. Our reporter, Ted Scouten, is still in there, so we are standing by waiting to hear from him so we could get a better idea of exactly what happened inside and what Trump's demeanor was, as well as the rest of his team and as well as special counsel Jack Smith. So we will have that to you as soon as we can. And a lot of people here, I've noticed some of the Trump supporters starting to head out. I saw some people walking out with their flags and their MAGA hats and walking away from the activity, whether it's the heat, whether they've just been out here so long, or whether it's the fact that they don't think that they're actually going to see him. We're not sure. And that's what we are really waiting for with this chopper shot that we have right now, whether we will be able to get a glimpse of the former president as he exits the courthouse. But we were able to see him earlier today, and we have some new video. This is coming to us from our news partners at the Miami Herald, just into the CBS News Miami newsroom. I hope that we can pull it up because it shows the former president leaving his resort at Trump National Doral. There he is. Looks like some cell phone video of him walking away with his team to the awaiting SUVs. I am sure they came in a pretty large caravan, several cars. It looks like he stopped and acknowledged some people. You see him there giving a wave. Perhaps it's hotel guests, club members there. He is waving as he heads off to that waiting SUV. But when he arrived here at the courthouse, no waves for the crowd. We are taking the live pictures once again of the motorcade that is assembled and waiting to head away from the courthouse as soon as this all wraps up. And I'm waiting to see whether or not the former president posts on Truth Social, because as people have mentioned, that might be the indicator that he is officially out of court, when he is able to use his cell phone again. But we do know that before he walked in, or as he was driving rather to the courthouse, he did send some messages on Truth Social saying, "On my way to courthouse, witch hunt, MAGA, one of the saddest days in the history of our country. We are a nation in decline." Interesting to see whether his demeanor matches that sadness, or whether he is defiant, whether he seems jovial and whether he seems unfazed. That still determined, or rather remains to be seen. We have not been able to determine his outlook, besides that one little video clip that we got from our news partners at the Herald of the former president leaving Trump National Doral at about 1:30 this afternoon. Now 3:25. We thought this would be quick, and it still could be. It's only 3:25, so we weren't anticipating that it would go much longer than half an hour to an hour. But we're getting now to that point, because the president, or the former president rather, did get here at around 2 o'clock. He was processed according to U.S. Marshals. Then it took a bit of time before we got word that he was actually in the courtroom, and then a few more minutes after that for him to officially plead not guilty. Let's bring in Larry Seward now, who is on the ground here at the courthouse. Larry, I'm seeing some people from where I am leaving. Is the crowd still pretty big where you are, it looks like there's quite a contingent from both sides.
Yes, what you're looking at is a counter-protest to the Trump supporters. You see those signs there. If we can pan to the left, you can see some that say lock him up. But to your right, you're looking at a group of Trump supporters that are standing on the sidewalk, and both sides expressing their constitutional right of voicing their opinions at one another. It has been civil, physically. Some words got exchanged that were hard. Some people walked away. But it's been like this pretty much the entire time we've been here. There are chants. You may hear them in the background. Those are the Trump supporters chanting at the counter-protesters. Some of the language here is a little bit raw. I'm going to step away so that you don't hear that, because some of the people are uttering words that aren't safe for television. But for the most part, again, people chanting at each other. Some of them have had conversations about the indictment, which was actually quite interesting. Some of the signs here on the left, someone has a sign that says Trump Indictment Celebration Tour, Manhattan, Miami, with check marks next to it, and then at the bottom, a next sign. Those to the right, the Trump supporters here, some of them have been talking about wondering when they might see the former president, if they will see him. That's something that we're all wondering. But the crowd not really diminishing, just we're seeing people walk back and forth. And again, some of the verbal clashes that you're looking at right here. But again, no major problem. Miami police are in the background. They have been there and been around. Anytime that they sense that there might be trouble, they get themselves.
I'm not sure if it's just me from where I am that I'm having trouble hearing you, but it's very difficult to understand what you're saying because of all the noise from the crowd. So I guess that's a testament to the fact that there still is quite a showing of people out there. And what was interesting from the view that Larry was showing us was most of the signs, at least the ones that I saw, said lock him up. So these are not Trump supporters. These were Trump protesters here in support of the special counsel's mission and this entire arraignment process and what is happening here in the courtroom. And that message that they have with lock him up, obviously hearkening back to a common refrain that we heard from the former president when he was running for office back in 2016 and saying that his opponent, Hillary Clinton, should be locked up. So interesting to see those signs turned around now and used against him by protesters who are here against the former president today. We're looking at these live pictures. We've got two different views. We've got Chopper on standby, ready for whenever this motorcade leaves, and this look here on the ground showing those blacked out SUVs that we presume the former president will be leaving in at any moment. Again, though, the way that he went in, we weren't able to see the vehicle, so it's possible that he will be able to get into a car completely undetected without anyone being able to see him on the ground here at the federal courthouse complex. Jim, Naja?
The first time we've seen the situation become a little more elevated, and you know, we're being extremely mindful. We want to bring you everything as it's happening, but we certainly don't want to ourselves elevate the situation, so we pull away from a shot if it starts to feel a little too intense. But Jim DeFede, bringing you back in, we're getting just a taste of it now. You talk about a nation divided, and certainly we felt the height of that, especially after the January 6th insurrection. We have talked about that even though that the Southern Court of Florida is known to move through things quickly, that we expect this to be drawn out for a long period of time. So when we talk about the nation divided, it almost feels like that would just continue to amplify the situation. And so then my question is, can the judge set limits? Can she set timetables on when things should happen to sort of quicken the process?
So that's a hard. So what's going to happen is that if Donald Trump wants a speedy trial, he can get a speedy trial. And there's an interesting comparison. Ted Stevens, United States Senator in Alaska, was facing public corruption charges, and he demanded a quick trial before the election because he wanted the case resolved. Donald Trump has there's no upside for Donald Trump to try to do that in this case. So I think that even the judge trying to move things along, there are still going to be issues on appeal, different issues that are going to go up. There are going to be motions there. And the fact that you're dealing with classified documents takes it into another level of bureaucracy, because all the lawyers have to then have national security clearances, and that goes to their background. And then you also, it's more of a process. Again, I am highly doubtful that you will see a trial before the election. And let's face it, let's say that, I know David Weinstein earlier talked about, 8, 9, 10 months, could maybe midsummer. Does anybody think you're going to have a trial in the middle of summer, like the same week perhaps as the Republican National Convention? You know, that's not going to take place. You're not going to have a trial in the days or weeks or even the last couple of months leading into an election, assuming Donald Trump is the nominee.
Although that really shouldn't be an issue, Jim, quite honestly. I mean, the legal system shouldn't run its timetable according to the political clock that we're on.
Yeah, but you know, there's also, for instance, there's a long-standing rule in the Department of Justice not to indict people, you know, within like a year of their election. This is unprecedented, so this is a little different, and I don't think this violates any DOJ standings because, again, this has been going on for 2 years, and the trial is, you know, it's still far away. Yeah. So,
and bringing in David Weinstein now, David, just chime in on that, on what Jim DeFede said. It sounds like Jim is essentially saying that the time frame of all this is pretty much set in stone on Trump's terms. In your experience, can the judge move things along, or is that how you see it as well?
It's not set on Trump's terms, and I don't disagree with Jim on how long this is going to drag out, and it's certainly in Trump's best interest to drag it out. But the case belongs to the judge, so she can move it along. The question is, will she move it along? Contrast that with what we saw happen up in New York, when they asked for a trial setting and they said that March was not good for them and people had places to be and things were going on and election taking place. That judge said, I'm setting the trial for March. You all need to get your act together and get what's going on. Now, these are much more serious charges, and we've been talking about that for several hours about how serious these charges are, but it's ultimately up to the judge to decide how long she's going to give the defense to get ready. And if they're just not doing anything to get ready, judges tend to light a fire under your behind and get you to move forward and get ready. But this is such an unusual case. And you're right, Jim. I can't see how this is going to happen right during the midst of the Republican National Convention with one of the people who are candidates running for all of this. But the system itself can't be run by the politics of it. The judges control their docket. They control their courtroom. It will remain to be seen just how in control Judge Cannon is going to be over this case, or whether she will just let the defense file their motions, ask for continuances, push it off, let it get pushed down the road, and we'd never see a resolution to all this. So it's really up to her. How tight a rein is she going to pull back, and how close is she going to hold these attorneys to get themselves ready and get this case moving forward?
And speaking to the judge that you bring up, because there's certainly an air or a reputation of impartiality when it comes to her and her sort of governing of Trump. So what are the next steps or the potential avenues in terms of, you know, there's been a call for her to rescind. What are your thoughts there?
Well, look, if she wants to recuse herself from this, that's up to her. She can just sign an order saying, I'm recusing myself. With regard to the Department of Justice, look, they gambled. They had, depending upon how many cases are going to go to which of the judges, they had anywhere from a 25% to a 33 1/3% chance that this would not go to her. And they gambled on the rest of the percentages, and they lost in a big way because they know how she's ruled in the past. But what she's done so far, I don't see the Department of Justice filing their motion recused based on that. It will take some additional action down the road where she shows her partiality and where they then will rely on that ruling and then the words that were handed down, the very harsh and severe words that were handed down by the 11th Circuit when they were reviewing her prior rulings, and then they will say, now this is why we believe you're not impartial. This is why we believe you should recuse yourself. And she may look at the motion to recuse and say, no, I'm not going to recuse myself based on that. But we're not going to see it right out of the box. I don't foresee them filing a motion to recuse in the coming weeks.
All right, for those of you who are just joining us, thank you, David. You're looking live at the scene outside the federal courthouse in downtown Miami. The shot on the left is actually a shot around the perimeter of the courthouse, and we are waiting to see when the former president will leave the courthouse. According to reporting from our Lauren Pastrana and others, those proceedings have not concluded. We do know that the former president has pled not guilty. You're looking on the right, and that's the scene of a lot of demonstrators, most of them pro-Trump supporters, some of them anti-Trump demonstrators who are gathered outside, and many people have come from all across the country to be here. We heard from CBS News Miami's Joe Gorcho, who said there's also a healthy number of people who are just local folks who wanted to be down there and express their opinion as well. Let's go back now to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana. Lauren, what's the latest you have?
Right now, we're still in wait-and-see mode, Jim. We've seen some activity, thinking something was maybe going on, at least, you know, an indication that this had wrapped up. But so far, we're still in a holding pattern, trying to get the latest from our crews who are actually inside of the courtroom to give us the details on how this all really went down. In the live pictures you're seeing, people are just walking around, milling about, you know, interested in finding out what happened, but really just interested in being here to either show their support or to protest against the former president, depending on which side of this issue they fall on. So that's really what we're seeing at the courthouse right now. It seems calm. I do know that we had earlier, when we were trying to speak with Larry Seward, the crowds got a little bit more impassioned. Those were those people who were speaking out against the former president. They had their signs that said, "Lock him up." And interesting to note, earlier today when I first got here at noon, there was a lot of graffiti on some of these barricades here that are not barricades, they're fences covered with mesh covering that had some not so nice things to say about the former president. And in the time that we've been standing out here, they've been spray painted over. So there were some expletives and some things that were not safe for television, and that has since been covered up. But obviously there were people out here at some point, perhaps overnight or earlier this morning, that painted those derogatory messages out here. And there are people over there closer to the courthouse expressing their opinions and why they are not happy with the former president, why they believe he is exactly where he needs to be right now. As far as the wording of this, let's say that he surrendered to federal authorities today. There was no official arrest warrant or anything like that, so he surrendered voluntarily. That's when they took his fingerprints and they processed him according to the U.S. Marshals, and then he came here and made that initial court appearance, whereas we've been reporting, and from what we heard, he pleaded not guilty to all 37 counts. And from what he had been saying before the arraignment, he said basically that's all he was going to say, that he was simply going to say not guilty. Unclear if perhaps throughout the course of the proceedings he was given another opportunity to say something, whether or not he took that opportunity. We are all waiting, just like everyone else watching at home, for those latest details to find out exactly how it all happened in court. I do know we have a couple of reporters on the ground right now. If our producers could just let me know who they want me to bring in right now, because I was unable to hear them earlier. Let's bring in Larry Seward once again. There we go. We couldn't hear him earlier, but it seems as though perhaps we've worked out that issue. Larry, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Lauren, and I've actually moved to the northwest corner of the federal courthouse. And I want to show you what's happening behind me. There is a woman. These are Trump supporters on three corners of the intersection here. But I want you to notice the woman in the white hat with the bullhorn. Someone to her right is streaming. She's very emotional, a passionate speech that she's giving, yelling across the street. There are other Trump supporters there across the crosswalk. Again, this is Northwest 1st Avenue and Northwest 5th Street. And if you could pan to the right a little more, you can see there are more supporters of the former president there with flags. There are balloons. They're wearing red, white, and blue. There's ongoing chanting. At the same time, if we look back over here to the left, you can see the police assembled in the large showing of officers there. There are a number of motorcycles that we saw part of the motorcade. You can see some of the officers there huddled near those motorcycles. They're not quite yet ready to mount them. Obviously, that would probably be a telling sign of the president, former president, potentially leaving the courthouse, obviously keeping an eye on all of that. But of course, the police presence here has been significant. On the other side of the courthouse, Lauren, you mentioned some of the clash of words that we saw between the supporters of former President Trump and those who were counter-protesting. But again, those here on this corner, pretty calm. There are no counter-protesters. They're holding their flags, waiting to get a glimpse of the former president in his motorcade going by. And again, they are on three corners preparing to do so. I'm going to step out of the way here. We'll send it back over to you, Lauren.
Larry,
this is Naja, and I just have a quick question for you. So, you know, we kind of have a bird's eye view in that we can see every reporter in their position. And I have to tell you, at this point, up until this point, for all of our hours of coverage, your scene is now the most active. When we went to you earlier, we saw the protesters. It sounded like their chants were starting to elevate. We see the situation where you're at now. So I continue to, as we go through this evening, ask you the same question. First of all, do you feel safe? And second of all, do you feel that the law enforcement presence where you're at is adequate for the situation?
Law enforcement presence is more than adequate for where we are. I want to show you, if we could spin around, obviously you can see the Trump supporters here. You saw the officers there. If we look on the other side of the street, there are Miami police cruisers on both sides, several of them with their lights flashing. Those officers are not all in those cruisers. Some of them are walking around, as you see a vehicle of the Florida Miami chapter of Trump supporters drive by with their 8 flags on the vehicle. There are plenty of officers on every block around this federal courthouse, so safety, I feel quite secure, and the folks that are gathered here also seem secure as well. And again, the clashes that we saw were mostly verbal. Saw nothing that seemed to escalate anything past that over on the other side. And again, when we left, there were still 2 groups having a spirited discussion, Naja.
All right, Larry Seward reporting to us from downtown Miami by the federal courthouse. Larry, thank you so very much. And again, the good news is that so far there has been no violence. There was some concern that things would get out of hand. That has not been the case, and certainly we hope it continues that way. You are looking live at the scene outside of the federal courthouse. Now it is going on 4 o'clock here. Former President Donald Trump got there shortly before 2 p.m., where he surrendered to authorities. He was processed. He pled not guilty. We're not certain if those proceedings are still going on. Lauren Pastrana reported that there was a crush of reporters who came out quickly, apparently as soon as they got the news that the former president, as expected, pled not guilty. The word that we have gotten, of course, all along is that the former president, once he is done here in South Florida, will fly back to Bedminster, New Jersey tonight, where he is expected to have a major campaign rally. And we expect, Naja, that another fiery speech outlining his point of view that basically this is a political witch hunt. But as we've heard our own Jim DeFeeti and legal expert David Weinstein say, that's not an argument that it certainly can be made in court.
Yeah, we're definitely getting a feel for the tone. CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana on the ground right now. And Lauren, we've been talking about this earlier, that there were sort of rumblings on social media. I know you've been monitoring social media. We expected to see a bus load of supporters from Orlando. There was also chatter about sort of a potential Proud Boys rally. Are you hearing or seeing anything new about gatherings on social media?
You know, if busloads arrived, they definitely, exited their buses far from the courthouse. No one actually drove in on any buses, at least not in the hours that I have been here. And because of the road closures, it would have been very difficult for them to get too close to the actual facility. Although I will say, and as Larry's live shot showed you, and as you've likely been seeing in some of these live pictures, cars are able to get by because, like we said, for some people, this is just business as usual in downtown Miami. Although I will say that I did get a message from a couple of friends who work in downtown Miami whose bosses told them, hey, just work from home today, avoid the chaos, rather than saying you're stuck in traffic and you can't make it, just make this a work from home day. So for some people, this did impact their day-to-day life and what they normally do here in downtown Miami, but otherwise it's just business as usual, with the exception of the crowd gathered outside of the Wilkie D. Ferguson Federal Courthouse. We've talked about where we anticipate the president will go later on this evening. All the reporting has been that he's going to head back up to, the former president rather, will head up to New Jersey to his resort in Bedminster to give a speech. The timeline is now looking like it might have to be pushed back because of how long this is taking. And I don't know if it's just, the logistics of getting him in and out of here under cover without being seen, or if perhaps they are planning to have a surrogate or a representative of some kind come out and make other remarks. We did hear from his attorney and spokesperson, Alina Habba, earlier today, just as the arraignment was really getting started. So perhaps we'll hear from someone again, and maybe that's what we're waiting for at this point. We simply do not know, because the court issued that order last last night for today, saying that there could be no devices, and anyone caught with a device or recording in any sort of way could be eligible for fines or perhaps even jail time. So our own Ted Scouten, who has been here since before 9 o'clock in the morning, I believe about 8:30, really has been on radio silence with us because he is unable to communicate in order to maintain the rules of that court order. So we are anxiously awaiting his departure from the courthouse as well, because we want to get his take on exactly what happened in the courthouse. From where I am right now, it's interesting. People are taking pictures of things completely unrelated to the proceedings that are happening here at the courthouse. As I mentioned, there's a big statue of a bull, and people are stopping and posing with it. People are walking their dogs, walking with their kids, just having coffee like this is any other day. And as far as safety here, there's a huge police presence around the area, but where I'm standing right now, there really is no need for those officers, because it doesn't seem like any of the overflow from the front of the courthouse is spilling out to where we are right now. So that is certainly some good news as far as our safety is concerned. And I'm just getting word right now from our producers that court now is officially over. So I'm not sure how long it will take the crews and everyone to exit the courthouse in hopefully an orderly fashion and make their way over to us to be able to give that insight of exactly what happened inside the courtroom. I'm going to continue to monitor social media just to see when and if the former president posts anything on social media, because now that court is over, he likely will be able to share his thoughts once again once he gets his device. So guys, I'm going to refresh that and hand things back over to you while I look into that information right now.
Lauren, thanks very much. And we do get that word that Trump's part of the arraignment is in fact over. He has signed a non-financial bond, which I'm going to interpret Jim DeFede to mean that he is essentially going to be released on his personal recognizance.
Yeah, I don't think there's any threat of the former president, under heavy security details anyway, of disappearing.
And we're also receiving word. We have a reporter on the scene, so she's sending us information in real time, and we're sharing it with you, that Trump cannot speak under the terms with the witnesses on the government witness list. Once they have that list, some of the witnesses are employees of Trump. He is allowed to speak with them about day-to-day businesses, but not about the facts in the case. So I have two questions there. A, is that realistic?
So this also goes to the heart of the problem. The investigation into Donald Trump focused on a lot of the employees who saw what they saw at Mar-a-Lago.
Exactly.
We saw just a week or so ago, we saw some folks from Mar-a-Lago coming and testifying at the grand jury in Miami. So this is one of those very strange situations where you could have folks who are, like service employees. I'm not talking about like his high-paid staff. I'm talking about like folks who earn a basic living, who need this job, and yet they are testifying. They were called before the grand jury and had to provide things. So that is tricky. Is it realistic? Look, I would assume that I would hope that Donald Trump would not attempt to interfere with a witness. That would bring new charges against him. If federal prosecutors find out that he violated the judge's order and, in fact, tried to, talk to witnesses in a way that was inappropriate, then that could not only change his status in terms of being released on his own recognizance, but it could also lead to new charges being filed against him. I'm sure his attorneys will tell him not to do that.
Yeah, and to clarify, too, as we pointed out earlier in our discussion, Jim, Mar-a-Lago is not just the former president's personal residence. It's also a private club. There are many members there. 150 people work there. And to your point, some of those employees have been called to testify, give testimony before the grand jury. Let's go back out to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana. Lauren.
All right, guys, I've had a chance to refresh social media to see if the former president had posted anything on his Truth Social. So far, nothing. His last post was before he went into the courthouse a couple of hours ago, saying he was on his way and calling this a witch hunt. But as we have just learned, the court has adjourned. The former president set to leave court any minute now. Whether we are able to see him, we are trying our very best from all the different angles we have surrounding the courthouse to see if we do get a glimpse of the former president before he makes his way either to the airport or or perhaps to an unplanned stop. We, of course, are going to have Chopper 4 over that to bring you the latest as it happens and as he makes his way eventually out of South Florida. Let's bring in Joe Gorcho right now. Joe, now hearing the news that court has adjourned, are people, you know, getting excited? Are they getting into position hoping to catch a glimpse?
I did see some people to my left just start running beside me. Not sure where they were going and what they were looking for, but you can still sense that people are waiting to see potentially off in the distance behind us here that maybe they'll catch a glimpse of the former president behind me here, and we'll switch views here. A gathering of the detractors here against the former president that are standing here voicing their beliefs and their concerns about the indictment, believing Trump should be locked up, he should be arrested. I'm reading a sign right in front of me that says Trump violated our Constitution, our laws. It's time justice prevails. And hello, ma'am, how are you doing today? So we've seen a small contingency, again, a little bit farther away than the main gathering of Trump supporters that are in front of me that you see here as we're walking toward it. Trump supporters have been more centralized by the courthouse today, offering their support, while the detractors have occasionally mingled in between to voice their opinions and their displeasure with the former president, believing he should be locked up. So again, you have two converging opinions here, but mostly Trump supporters with a few detractors here or there. Let's listen to some of those detractors and why they felt it was important to be out here today for this hearing. Oh, we do not have that sound, but I can tell you part of the reason they felt, one woman felt compelled to come all the way from Maryland here because she believes that if she doesn't voice what she feels is right, that she's feeding into the big lie is what she said, and that she's willing to die for democracy is what she also told me. So some strong words from some of the people here, again, voicing against the former president. But what we're looking for right now is to see if there's any movement from anywhere there, people trying to catch a glimpse. We're going to continue to walk down this way. You good so far, Waverly? As he's walking with me here, don't want him to trip as we're walking through. Tons of media presence. If we just stop for a second and pan, you'll just see tents again all over as everyone getting prepared to share what they've heard again from inside the courtroom. But in terms of a big buzz, Lauren, I think that's what you were talking about. People trying to get an understanding of what happened inside. Can't really gauge that right now. Some of the excitement around being here today has kind of fizzled out, to be quite honest with you. The crowd seems to have thinned out even by in front of the courthouse. I think people are understanding they most likely might not see the former president, and therefore a couple told me they're going to try to go home and beat traffic. So I'm not sure how many people are going to continue to stay out here now that the hearing has concluded. So we'll continue to walk around the crowd, get some sentiment. If people have heard what the former president has done in terms of what was done inside there today and some of the charges that were listed, and we'll continue just to intermingle around the crowd and get a sense for how they're feeling today.
Reporting for us. Thank you, Joe.
All right, so now we know court is adjourned. Trump is now set to leave court. So Jim DeFeeti, walk us through what happens from here. What are the next steps in this historic process?
So let's talk about the one detail that we got out of the courtroom that we haven't discussed yet. His co-defendant, Nauta, you know, also made his first appearance. He's going to have to return, you know, in a couple of weeks. But he did not have an attorney with him today in court.
What's the significance of that?
Well, look, you know, Walt Nauta was the former president's valet. He was his body man. He's with him every day at Mar-a-Lago. And according to the indictment, you know, he helped try to hide and move boxes, which is why he was also criminally charged along with the former president. I know that there were efforts to try to get Walt Nauta to testify against Donald Trump before the indictment. He would be perhaps the most compelling witness because he would have been the person side by side with Donald Trump through this time. He decided not to cooperate and is now criminally charged. The thing that, you know, often what happens is your mood changes, your view changes after you're charged.
Absolutely.
And suddenly you start facing the prospect that you could go to prison now over this. So the fact that he was not represented by counsel was probably covered by Trump's attorneys at the time. That's what people are going to watch. You're going to have to see eventually who is representing him, and does he change attorneys? Are his attorneys aligned with the Trump attorneys? Are they being paid for by Donald Trump? And usually the clearest sign when a suspect or an individual changes and goes from being non-cooperative to cooperative is they fire their attorney and a new attorney comes on to represent them. So we're going to keep a close eye on that.
But essentially, I mean, they're labeled as co-conspirators in this case. So can they have the same legal team? Their legal teams can work together?
They can. If they decide that they want to mount a joint defense, that they can basically say that the defense of Donald Trump and the defense of Walt Nauta are identical and that we're going to make this case proactively, you know, they could do that.
We may be seeing some movement here now, guys, as we see some members of, looks like the motorcade is beginning to slowly leave the courthouse, the Wilkie Ferguson Courthouse in downtown Miami, named after a legendary figure here, of course, in South Florida, and the former president, Donald Trump, and his entourage leaving the courthouse after the former president was arraigned today on those federal charges laid out in that indictment, which was unsealed last week. 37 counts, essentially accusing the former president of violating the Espionage Act, of holding on to classified documents when he shouldn't have, failing to return them in a timely manner. And so now the former president leaving, as we see that some of his supporters there, and perhaps also some pro-Trump, anti-Trump demonstrators, I should say, they're also gathered amongst that crowd as he leaves the courthouse.
So that was Northwest 1st Avenue, and he just turned right onto Northwest 3rd Street, which will start taking him back towards the highway.
And Jim, I want to go back to what you were saying, because I could see how it would be in Trump's benefit to want to sort of team up on attorneys. But what is Nauta gain from that? You would think that it would be in his best line to sort of have his own legal representation.
Look, you don't know the relationship between Donald Trump and Walt Nauta. From what we understand, Walt Nauta is not a highly political person. He's a former Marine. And loyalty is a key attribute for him. That's what we are understanding. So for now, he is loyal to the man who he's been closest to for the past couple of years, Donald Trump. You know, sometimes it's hard to get people to turn against those that they love and respect. Eventually, that may change. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and we know he was at the dinner last night in Doral with Trump.
So meantime, we're looking at the motorcade leave, and Jim, you said it turned out of the courthouse heading...
that was also 3rd Street, and so I'm guessing that they're probably headed over towards 95 to try to get on the highway there.
There we see making a right turn, and traffic there is being stopped, obviously, so the motorcade can proceed. And again, we're all looking to see if the former president makes an unscheduled stop here in South Florida somewhere, or if he heads right to the airport to fly out of South Florida after his arraignment here in Miami on those charges, 37 counts of him allegedly mishandling classified documents.
Yeah, there was some discussion, and there's some background that he may make a stop in Miami, you know, but to be honest with you, court went a little later than people thought, so that may affect it as well.
Yeah, we expected it to be in and out. Not too terribly late, but we have been sitting here for about 2 hours now, and by all accounts, his next stop, according to reports, is going to be New Jersey for his big campaign rally, and he certainly has the ammunition he needs to gather a lot of support.
One thing we did not see today is the former president make a stop to acknowledge any of the people there, the crowd, the supporters, as well as the anti-Trump demonstrators there. They were there, certainly out in force. We saw them, and we had numerous reports from our reporters in the field indicating the very strong passions on both sides, pro and against the former president. And as we see now, the motorcade moving onto the highway, and it looks to be heading, hard to tell, can't see the signs, looks like they're heading south, though, Jim. There is indication that he is going to make a stop. So we will stay on this picture and just sort of see how that goes, and it could get interesting here in the next 10 minutes. And we see all the traffic that is at a standstill as the presidential motorcade makes its trek here, and again, we're trying to determine exactly where the road is. Looks like they might be. Well, we don't want to say exactly where they are because we're not sure. But anyway, the motorcade here is moving at at a very healthy clip. And so we'll just stand by. You see all the traffic there at a standstill, the road completely clear. That looks like it's I-95.
Yeah, it would make sense that they would jump on I-95 and then probably take 836 or get off. So we'll sort of see how that goes. That was the closest exit, the major highway to get on out of the courthouse. So we will know soon enough.
Yes, we will. Former President Donald Trump, again, arriving in South Florida yesterday. He hunkered down overnight at his golf resort in Doral. Shortly before, around 1:30 this afternoon, he left there to head to the federal courthouse in downtown Miami, spent almost 2 hours there, where he was arraigned on those 37 counts, pleaded not guilty, as we expected, on those charges of allegedly mishandling classified documents.
And very peaceful. You know, we saw a couple instances where things verbally got heated, but no fights. Our reporters throughout the day told us that they felt very safe. There were reports that there were going to be buses of people coming from Orlando and other parts, and our reporters out in the field said that if those buses did come, again, everything was very peaceful, and commending both our Miami law enforcement on how they handled the situation. You know, there was a lot of criticism leading up that maybe they didn't amp up security protocols enough to handle a situation of this magnitude, but by all accounts, everything went very smoothly, and this was a collaboration between, you know, federal agencies and local law enforcement, and to handle a situation of this magnitude so flawlessly is tremendous. So hopefully that continues to be the situation.
The road completely clear there. No cars there as the motorcade leaves the courthouse. And we did not hear from the former president. We did hear from one of his attorneys, Alina Habba, who said that this represents a destruction of American principles. She says that this is politically motivated. Of course, this is something that we've heard time and again. And she said this reflects a two-tiered system of justice. That is, of course, a refrain that we figure to hear repeatedly now over the coming weeks and months from the former president and his allies.
Yeah, sure. Let's go now to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana. She's out in the field right now. And Lauren, what's the situation where you're at?
Jim, Naja, the situation is that now that the court has cleared out, we can finally hear exactly what happened inside. I'm joined by CBS News Miami's Ted Scouten. Ted, thanks so much for being here. You've basically been locked down without access to the outside world for a few hours here as you've watched these proceedings unfold. My first question to you was, what was the former president's demeanor, and what did he say, and what did you tell me?
Well, actually, the former president said nothing at all. There was no talking from him, only through his attorneys. His demeanor throughout much of the time there in the courtroom, he sat with his arms crossed. He had a bit of a scowl or a serious look on his face as all this was going on. I was about 15 feet behind him. I was 3 rows behind him. When he left the courtroom, he kind of looked back at all of us who were in there, had a serious look, you might call it a scowl on his face, and then was taken out by Secret Service. In between us, there were 2 rows of Secret Service agents, 8 or 9 agents there to protect the former president while he was in the courtroom.
As far as other people there with him, any family members showing support for him, or was it really just his legal team there in the courtroom and Secret Service?
What I was able to see is it was pretty much just the legal team that was there, as well as Secret Service. On the other side, on the prosecution side, the special counsel was there, Jack Smith, was there in the courtroom, sitting right behind the prosecutors at their table. There were probably around maybe 40 or 50 media members in there, as well as about 10 people from the public.
And we were thinking this would be quick. A lot of the reporting these last few days have been, okay, this initial court appearance will only take about 15 minutes or so. It seems like you were in there, obviously, over the course of the day, much longer. But from when we got word that Trump had been processed and that the U.S. Marshals had given us that information, it seems as though it was quite a stretch of time. Did it take longer than you anticipated? Was there more to it that maybe we weren't aware of?
It didn't really take longer than I anticipated. It started just before 3 o'clock and ended around 3:45, so 45 minutes. And there were 2 people having their first appearance. It was Trump and it was Walt Nauta, who was also there. Trump was actually arraigned as well. Now, that happened because he had his permanent legal counsel there, so that allows him to do the arraignment. At that point, that's when his attorney When the judge asked, you want to put in a plea, the attorney said, certainly not guilty. So the attorney said the not guilty plea. After that, that's when they started to kind of give the conditions of his release. He does not have any travel restrictions. He does not have to turn in his passport. He can travel anywhere in the U.S., anywhere around the world if he wants to. He didn't have to put up any money for bond. It was personal recognizance, basically a personal surety bond. So it was relatively simple on that. The only thing they had that caused extra time in there is they were talking about one of the conditions of release, which was whether or not he would be able to talk to any of the witnesses or potential victims in this case. Initially, he was told that he can't talk to them about the case, but can still talk to them. Because you have to keep in mind, many are his staff, others are on Secret Service, so there is a communication that they have. So they were trying to hammer out all the details of that. In the end, what's going to happen is the prosecution is going to put together a list of people who he can speak to, but not talk to about the case itself.
Did they give any inkling as to when the next step in the judicial process will occur? Some people were saying, oh, this is going to be a speedy trial, but others are thinking this is going to go well past the election day. I know the case in New York, I believe the next hearing isn't until March of 2024, which is about a year from when he was originally indicted and arraigned in New York. Was there any information given as to when we might see either Trump or someone from his legal team in court again for this case?
We didn't get any information like that about what's next in terms of days or dates for ex-President Trump. What we did get is on the 27th, that's when Walt Nauta is going to come back, or his attorney at least, will have to come back to do the arraignment. That's when he's expected to put in the formal not guilty plea. So
Nauta did not say anything in court because he didn't have his attorney there to do it for him, or what was the logistics behind Nauta's appearance?
He had his attorney in there. This is a little bit inside baseball. In order to do an arraignment in the Southern District of Florida in federal court, you have to have an attorney who is admitted to the Southern District of Florida, to the bar, so to speak, of the Southern District of Florida. Okay. So since he's not, he's in the process of getting all that permission to be able to do that. So it's more of a technicality that that he wasn't arraigned.
And that court date on the 27th, is that expected to be here in Miami as well, or are we thinking this might perhaps move up to Palm Beach County, because at the end of the day, that's where those documents were found?
It's going to be here in Miami.
Okay.
At least for right now. The chief judge is going to be the one who actually does the arraignment in that case.
Okay. So the magistrate that heard it today is not going to be obviously the judge who sees the case through?
No, as a matter of fact, he sounded like he was a bit relieved that he said, you know, and my time in this case is done right about now.
All right. All right, and Ted, thank you so much. You stick around because I'm sure you're going to have much more insight for us throughout the evening. I do want to bring in right now CBS News Miami's Peter Dench. He is at Versailles, where earlier today we heard that a caravan of people would be coming from the infamous restaurant, the landmark Miami restaurant, over to the courthouse. But it looks like a lot of the people just stayed there, Peter, and decided to show their support for the former president.
That's right, Lauren. If you can hear me, it's very loud here, but this is what people by the dozens have been waiting for all day. An expected visit they hope for by Donald Trump here to the Versailles Cuban restaurant. You hear the signs from Miami-Dade police as a motorcade has stopped here amid some great anticipation. Now we're told that a room has been set aside here at the Versailles restaurant for a meeting between Donald Trump's supporters and the former president. So that's what everybody here has been waiting for. You see people out with their cell phones getting pictures and all that. The motorcade has stopped here, and of course this is a landmark restaurant. It's where Donald Trump stopped during his 2016 presidential bid, where he had some coffee at the time. And so people have been out here since late this morning, camped out. Initially they were going to take a caravan to the federal courthouse, but then they heard there was a possibility, again the possibility, that the former president would in fact stop at this restaurant for a visit. So the police are out in the street stopping traffic at this point. You may be able to see some pictures from our Chopper 4 right now as we speak. Again, this is a very fluid situation, Lauren, as we believe the former president is going inside to pay his respects to his supporters at the Versailles Cuban Cuisine restaurant here on Southwest 8th Street near 37th Avenue. So everything has come to a standstill. So many people here are out with their cell phones. Miami police and Miami-Dade police are here. We have a photographer inside the Versailles restaurant. Our Tom Rabady is in there with a couple of others, hoping for being part of a visit between the former president and his supporters. So that's the situation here at what is now a very busy Versailles restaurant here on Southwest 8th Street. Lauren?
Peter, I'm curious, since you've been there all day, have you spotted any other local leaders, local officials, perhaps they're hunkering down, hoping that they're able to have sort of an audience with the former president there? I know he's got a lot of support from elected officials here in South Florida. Anyone of interest that you've spotted?
Well, that's a good question. No, we haven't. We thought that would indeed be a tip-off all day, that some top local leaders would be here. One of the tip-offs to me was that the head waiter, who I see here sometimes when I come here for lunch, came up to me and said, "Hi, Peter, how you doing?" I didn't recognize him because he was dressed in a suit. So that was the first tip-off that something special was going on. Then we saw Secret Service agents in and out of the bakery and all that. And then they came up to us and told Yvonne Taylor that they had a special room reserved inside for the former president and his supporters and some people from the Versailles restaurant here and all that. So this is a situation. Traffic has come to a standstill here on Southwest 8th Street with a motorcade with Miami-Dade police leading the way. And so it's what people had anticipated. They're all supporters here. You don't find any detractors here at this Versailles restaurant. Some of them believing that things have not been fair to the former president. And so that's the situation here. People waiting to get a glimpse of him and also show their support for him.
Quite the scheduled stop and the photo op there, as the former president there is expected to appear any moment. And we've got, as you see, a camera shot inside Versailles restaurant and outside as well. And of course, this is a landmark establishment here in South Florida and in the hub of the Cuban American community, which of course has been staunchly behind the former president for many, many years. And so for those people there, this is certainly quite a thrill that the former president would make this stop there in their own backyard.
Yeah, this is a classic tradition. Presidential candidates going back decades stop at Versailles to have a little coffee, usually at the front window. This time, Donald Trump is taking it inside. His support within the Cuban American community is something that has helped him win the state of Florida twice. It's critical for his ongoing efforts in the elections ahead. And so in some ways, it's really not a shock, but it is. But at the same time, this is also former President Trump saying, I am continuing to do the types of things. I'm not going to let the government deter me. He'd rather be seen surrounded by his supporters at a place like Versailles in a little Havana than in a federal courtroom.
And I have to say, Jim, you sort of under the radar gave us a tip-off. You'd received word that this might happen. But of course, this is where the former President Trump stopped in 2016 for some coffee during his presidential bid. And so he's just, paying respects to his supporters during this most turbulent time. I thought it was interesting that our CBS News Miami's Peter Dinch spoke about seeing a waiter that he had seen regularly who recognized him by name. And Peter also had a good feeling that we were going to see a stop here from the former president because that server, who was normally in casual gear, was dressed in a suit. Our reporters also learning that there is a special room set aside where the former president will be. And so quite interesting to see all those people gathered with their cameras. No word yet on whether Trump will speak. We do have a crew inside. But of course, former President Trump is going to have to be very mindful of every word that comes out of his mouth at this point moving forward. And so
wait a second, I gotta stop you there.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has never been careful about any word.
Let me finish.
Go ahead.
Let me finish. Because everything he says will be used against him.
There we see him inside now, the former president shaking hands with supporters who are surrounding him. And certainly he is there in his element there in Versailles amongst a very friendly crowd of people.
This is what the president needed. This is a bomb for him. This is the type of, by the way, that's Walt Nauta just over his shoulder, his co-defendant in the case, still acting as his body man.
I wish we had audio so we could hear what he's saying, but
right.
he looks like he's just
I would like to know,
people.
because, and to continue to what I was saying, Jim, the consequences are greater than they've ever been. So certainly his legal team would at least be advising him to be more mindful.
And there he is taking selfies and various photographs with supporters there who are surrounding him, and obviously very happy that he is in their midst. So former President Donald Trump, after making that appearance where he was arraigned in federal court in downtown Miami, making, I guess you'd call it a scheduled detour over to Little Havana and at the Versailles restaurant.
Well, my point is the president needs moments like this. Like this is a bad day for him. You know, I'm sure he didn't sleep well last night, you know, being in federal court, you know, facing a long, lengthy prison sentence. He thrives off the love and adulation of his supporters. This is the chicken soup, as it were, for a very rough day.
And you can certainly see it in his presence there. I mean, he sort of looks like he's got a little extra pep in his step, different than how we heard CBS News Miami's Ted Scouten describe him in the courtroom, sort of a somber, very stoic, serious presence. This, as you refer to, the chicken soup, seems like he's got a little life sort of injected back into him.
No, absolutely. And again, I'm just fascinated by the fact that Walt Nauta, his co-defendant, who's facing decades in prison himself, still works as his body man, is still just off to the side. He's the bald gentleman. You can't see him in that shot, but you'll see him a little bit later. He's a younger man, a little shorter. You know, and the fact that he is still performing that job is amazing to me. But this is a great moment.
You know, we can't see Nauta, but we can certainly see the former president. And this is, as you pointed out, Jim, classic Donald Trump, seizing the moment around in a very friendly crowd there at Versailles restaurant. And as we have pointed out, many supporters there. And those who couldn't get inside, as you see the crowd outside, they caught a glimpse of the former president as he went inside. And we also have a camera inside. No audio there.
And I'm sure we'll turn that sound around as quickly as we can.
Right.
We're not deliberately not playing what he's saying. We don't have that capability right now.
Yeah, Jim, we saw the former president's son Eric with him earlier as he, I think, left the courthouse and left Doral. Anybody else there you recognize in the crowd are there with him?
I'm not. I'm looking for local elected officials. You know, one of the things that was interesting was the day after his indictment, Miami-Dade or Miami Congressman Carlos Jimenez went golfing with him and tweeted it out. Normally, people don't usually tweet out photos with individuals.
Yeah.
So that's the press pool. So the pool has now been pulled, which means the visit is wrapping up soon. So I would expect that it will only be there for a couple more minutes. But no, you know, I apologize. I lost my train of thought.
That's all right, Jim. That's all right. Yeah, we're obviously trying to keep track of what's going on here. It looks like this is a very brief visit at Versailles. I'm not even certain that the president actually even stopped for a cup of coffee or a cup of cafecito. But
no, just definitely some picture ops to pay tribute to his supporters. And you know, you talk about Nauta and his allegiance to the president, and that is something that has been by commentators noted throughout the presidency and the aftermath, that Trump has these staunch, loyal supporters. Yeah, we see him waving right there, and getting into the car.
Right.
And possibly headed now to the airport.
To the airport, yeah. They're going to be taking off here very soon. So Jim, again, as we talked about the fact that this is sort of Donald Trump's classic M.O., just really moments after maybe a legal watershed moment for him, he spins it the opposite direction to try to use it to his political advantage.
Well, he's letting you know he's not deterred. That these charges and any future charges, and no matter how many indictments he may face, he's going to continue to do what he does. He's going to be on the campaign trail. He's going to be out talking to his supporters. He's going to be building off that love that he feels from them, and this was the act of defiance. He may not have spoken in court. Ted Scouten earlier said that he didn't actually say anything really, and so this is his moment. This is where he is telling prosecutors, you can do whatever you want. I'm still Donald Trump, and people love me.
Yeah, we see the police moving people to the sidewalk, clearing the road because the motorcade is about to pull off of Southwest 8th Avenue, Calle Ocho there, just near 37th Avenue in the heart of Little Havana. The former President Donald Trump, just moments, maybe an hour or so after being arraigned in federal court on some very serious charges, making a scheduled stop, you would say, there at Versailles restaurant in the heart of where his most ardent supporters are. And now the motorcade is taking off, presumably, as you mentioned, Najee, heading toward Miami International Airport.
Less than 10 minutes? I mean, total time at Versailles, about 10 minutes.
Sure, sure. And, you know, we talk about his staunch supporters, as you've mentioned with Nada. We've also mentioned that we are starting to see some people soften on the Republican side, but also some people sort of refraining from commenting, because we have to remember that he is still the Republican front runner in this case, in this situation. So essentially there is potential that if he were to gain office, I think some Republican politicians are skirting the line, and keeping that in mind, that is a real possibility.
That is certainly true. As we look at the paparazzi, they're trying to get a glimpse of the former president. This has become quite the spectacle there in Southwest Miami-Dade right now.
But peaceful, thank goodness, still peaceful even at this hour.
Well, of course, yeah, and you figure most of the people here, if not all, are going to be pro-Trump people there in the heart of Little Havana. So we've seen the former president come to South Florida. He stopped traffic in Doral, stopped traffic in downtown Miami, and now he's stopping traffic there on Calle Ocho. But now the motorcade is leaving, and we presume that it will head a little bit west and then turn north to head to Miami International Airport. And of course, we will stay with this video. And you see a lot of people there to our left who seem very, very happy that the former president made this stop and that they may have gotten a glimpse of him.
Oh, absolutely. No, this is exactly, as I said, this is what the president wanted. Now, he will get on his plane. He will fly back to Bedminster tonight to his resort. He is scheduled to make an address at 8:15, you know, where we can expect to hear him rail against the charges against him, talk about the weaponization of the Justice Department. Even though we didn't have the audio, you know, just the nature of the way he was speaking, I can tell you, my guess is when we hear that audio from inside Versailles, he will be stressing those same points, being angry and indignant over these charges. We'll hear more of it tonight, and he will raise millions off of what he said today and what he says tonight. Millions of dollars will come in from his supporters to try to help him, not just with his legal costs, but win the presidency again. Now, he is the front runner, but it's a long way to go. But right now, Chris Christie, I think, said last night, and I think it's very true, Chris Christie is one of the few people who is actually taking on Donald Trump directly and saying these charges are real, they are disqualifying. Chris Christie has argued that the only way to beat Donald Trump is to go through Donald Trump. All the other candidates, like Ron DeSantis, seem to try to want to try to get around and skirt around Donald Trump. Yeah. I'm not sure that'll work, though.
Yeah, we heard that narrative during the town hall in CNN last night when Chris Christie spoke. Let's go back out now to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana. So, Lauren, what's happening where you're at?
Guys, it's really quiet here right now. Obviously, most of the excitement is surrounding Little Havana and the former president's planned but unplanned, perhaps, depending on who you ask, stop at Versailles. We had reporting earlier today that we thought that he would stop by, and Peter Dench had been very vigilant, saying that the crowds who were expected to come here to the courthouse in a caravan had decided to sit tight because they were hearing some rumblings that perhaps Trump would pass by to meet with some of his supporters. So since it's quiet here, let's just go right back over to Peter Dench over at Versailles restaurant. Peter, the former president just left. I imagine that the crowds are still out there and very excited about this impromptu visit. Sounds like someone's talking on the phone right next to you, so speak up, Peter.
van a transmitir en vivo ahora. ¿Oíste?
That's right. Well, I'm with Miguel Saavedra of Vigilio Mambisa about the visit, and it meant a lot to the people here. He is one of dozens of people here leading this human rights Cuban exile group. And you saw the former president go in.
That's
you
right.
waited
That's
all
right.
day for this. What did it mean to you as the head of Vigilio Mambisa? What did this mean to you?
You know, it's better for they coming over here to the Latin community because the people supported 100% of Trump. In this moment, everybody they talk to Trump. All of the people they talk to him. They supported you because you doing good job 4 years ago, and now they wanted you return back to the government to doing the same you're doing.
It seemed the treatment here was more like a rock star. Dozens of people clapping, cheering, whipping out their, cell phones, iPhones to take pictures. Why do you think there's so much support here for the former president like this?
Yeah, because the people is excited. He want a new president of the United States. They don't want a more social communism in the White House. The people, they want a new change for the whole American. The America, they need that for now.
Now, Donald Trump was here for less than 15 minutes, went inside, met with supporters. You saw him go in. What do you think the message he was giving his supporters here, as far as you know?
Yeah, the people, they want to give a message to Trump. They supporting him, and then the moment is right because he's waiting for the election 2024 for he take the power, for giving the American what the Americans they need now. They don't want anymore the same situation more.
Thank you very much. So that's the feeling here. Sentiments about people who spent the whole day here waiting outside the Versailles restaurant for a possible visit from Donald Trump. And as he left just minutes ago, his vehicle moved very slowly, and we got a glimpse and a picture of him waving through the window at his supporters here. Now, we had a crew inside with the former president for his visit. We hope to be turning that tape around for you. So that's the situation here at the Versailles restaurant. People have been waiting for this visit all day, and they got a chance to see him, and some supporters actually met with him inside this restaurant.
And Peter, we saw the video inside as the president was making the rounds, sort of, and engaging with his supporters, people taking cell phone pictures. You're outside that location, but just speak to sort of the mood elevation or what you saw around you as, his motorcade made its way to you, and then watching the president then walk into the restaurant.
Well, the mood was incredible. I mean, it's like they were expecting to see some sort of superstar. Their passion for this former president is quite something, and it was a day of anticipation here for so many people. And as he came here, it was they dashed into the street. In fact, police had to usher people back onto the sidewalk because they were actually running into traffic just to see him as the motorcade stopped and he went inside the Versailles restaurant. And again, as I mentioned earlier, did not find any detractors here. All of people here were supporters of the former president.
Okay, Peter, thank you so much for that perspective. And it's still very loud there at the Versailles restaurant. As you mentioned, people there very excited. The former president playing right to his base, knowing that he would get a very friendly crowd, and that's exactly what he got. You're looking live at the former president's motorcade now as it is leaving Little Havana, presumably heading now to Miami International Airport. I want to go, let's bring back in CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana. And Lauren, as you mentioned, that's something that we had all heard was going to happen. We didn't want to actually say it would happen until it did happen. Let's talk about that dynamic and Donald Trump's appeal within the Cuban American community and why it has been so strong and why it still remains so strong.
He, for a long time, has had overwhelming support. A big part of the Cuban American community, especially the older generation of Cuban Americans, have long favored the Republican Party over Democrats because in their minds there is that link, again, in their perception of things between the Democratic Party and perhaps socialism, which is what they wanted to escape when many of them left Cuba. As we've seen over the years, it seems as though the younger generations of Cubans are starting to go in the opposite direction, not think in the same way as, their abuelitos and their parents. But there is still a strong contingent, even of young Cuban Americans here in South Florida, that are very ardent Trump supporters. I've seen them out here today. I'm sure that there were plenty at Versailles. So that's just always been a part of the Cuban American way of life here in South Florida that many associate with the Republican Party, and in turn wholeheartedly support the former president. There are a lot of elected leaders here in South Florida who are also Cuban American and also very staunch supporters of the former president. As I was looking at those live pictures from Little Havana, I really thought I was going to see some of those people. I don't want to say any of their names because perhaps right now at this moment in history, they don't want to associate themselves with the former president due to the circumstances that he now finds himself in. But at other times, they have stood by him, even so far as, you know, showing their support on social media in the wake of hearing that he would be indicted. But I think what sort of turned the tide was when that lengthy indictment actually was unsealed. They were able to read the charges. And as we've seen from some of the people who have supported Trump over the years, they're sort of walking that back, or at least trying to be a little bit more careful about what they say in support of the former president.
Well, the former president still getting the presidential treatment here, Lauren, as we see his motorcade turn onto the road heading to Miami International Airport. Again, a traffic stop on the opposite side of the street as the presidential motorcade rolls by. And so the former president is on his way to Miami International Airport.
Wouldn't life be easier if we could all travel through South Florida with roads closed down and traffic lights relevant? Life down here would be a lot better with that.
It sure would, but I wouldn't change that for what the former president is up against at this point. And we want to go now back out to CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana, because I understand that we have reporters stationed, Lauren, at the airport right now who are anticipating what's happening next.
Yeah, we're watching these live pictures to see when the former president arrives at Miami International Airport. He usually enters through a private air charter company, if you will. So that's usually along 36th Street, but there are other ways into the airport, especially along Lejeune. So we're going to keep an eye out to see exactly where he's going. If you have anyone who you know needs to be around the airport,
stop, I guess you would say, there at Versailles, restaurant in Little Havana, and then right back to his plane.
Yeah, but you sort of get the feeling now that the president has his second wind. You know, we've heard the reports that he had sort of a very somber demeanor inside the courtroom, and that's not the feeling we got at all when we saw him in Versailles. He seemed energized. He seemed like it was exactly what he needed, and it's what his supporters wanted to see. But I think in all this, we can't get lost in the momentum of this and lose the fact of the severity of the situation. And so we now know moving forward, his next steps include finding local representation, a lawyer here in South Florida. And I'm just wondering, how big of a task is that going to be for him?
To find the attorneys?
Yes.
Look, my guess is there will be attorneys. It's hard to find an attorney so quickly. He was indicted on Thursday. 2 of his attorneys quit the next day. So it's only been, 72 hours or so. So he will find local counsel. And the importance of local counsel, as I mentioned earlier, is just people who are familiar with the landscape, people who are familiar with the judges, the rules in the Southern District. Every district is supposed to be the same, but they all operate a little differently. There are customs and traditions that each district court has. And so you want somebody who's familiar with it. Plus, you want to bring in good attorneys, trial attorneys. A lot of the attorneys that he has right now are not necessarily litigators, defense attorneys. You need high-profile criminal defense attorneys who are also specialists in national security matters. So that pool gets increasingly smaller. So it will take him a little time, but I have no doubt that he'll find local counsel to represent him.
Is he under a time frame?
No, he has an attorney, Chris Keiss, who was the former Solicitor General for the state of Florida. So there is a Florida attorney on his team. But no, you would want to have an attorney before you start making new motions into, either trying to get the case dismissed or whatever might happen. So eventually, but I would imagine that if he hires somebody, we'll see in the next couple weeks.
All righty. So as we see, the former president has boarded his plane along with those who are flying with him back to Bedminster, New Jersey. Do we have David Weinstein still with us? David, are you there? Okay, if we don't, Jim, let's keep this discussion here with you. What are your big takeaways from what we've seen today?
So I think it's important to take a step back and realize this is a sad day in American history. A former president criminally charged. Now, some people think it's a sad day because they believe that former presidents shouldn't be charged in this way, and that especially a former president who is in line to be running again, and that they see that as a problem. For others, it's a sad day because the nature of the charges are so serious that it undermines the country in several ways, especially with our allies. And so that's sad. But the saddest part of all is how divided we are. And cases like this, I think, really show the divisions in the country. And those divisions, there is a fault line here in which there is a segment of the population that will never believe that Donald Trump did anything wrong. There is a segment that will believe Donald Trump will never do anything right. And the vast majority of folks who are in the middle are squeezed because it's the loudest voices on both ends which tend to get the attention. And so I don't know, this does not help what happened today bring us together as a country. It continues that divide. But I don't know that the federal government had any real choice, because if you believe the phrase, no one is above the law, which we hear Republicans and Democrats say all the time, if no one is truly above the law, then even that applies to a former president. And that's what we saw today. If you want to take solace, this is a sign of the system holding that standard that no one is above the law.
And I guess if you want to take solace, we did see both sides of people pro and anti-Trump today, and they were having heated and animated discussions.
But peaceful.
Right.
But peaceful.
But it never got crazy.
Yeah, let's bring in now David Weinstein. David, what are your big takeaways from what we've seen today?
Not surprisingly, former President Trump behaved unlike any other defendant I've seen. When you're brought into court and you are making your initial appearance and you're lucky enough to get released without having to stay in detention either for the 3 days right after your arrest or down the road before you go to trial, you're quiet, you're not robust, you're not running out, you're not making appearances with people who support you, and you're very quiet about the charges that have been filed against you because you're listening to your lawyer and you're taking this very seriously. We didn't see any of that today. They let someone out who's been accused of moving, holding, and keeping defense secrets of this country. He's allowed to travel wherever he wants. Granted, he's a public figure. If he was any other defendant, this never would have been happening. But he is, of course, a former president of the United States. And the other interesting thing, and Jim, you've been talking a lot about this, Nauta doesn't have an attorney yet. He's standing behind his co-conspirator as charged in the indictment right now. But let's see what happens down the road when the president, former president, puts together this legal team, people from throughout the country to defend him and to attack this. And if it's a joint defense, then he'll be lucky to be part of it. But if he's left on the side of the road to fend for himself on charges that for him could carry up to 90 years in prison, I think he'll start changing his mind about who he's going to support. So again, to me, the two things that stand out is this special treatment that they gave to a defendant who then walks out of the courtroom and goes to Versailles to shake hands, and what's going to happen with his co-defendant in this case, and is he going to stay on Team Trump, or is he going to get off and find his way to a path that's going to result in a reduced sentence for him?
It's going to be fascinating to see, David, and certainly we will watch the many twists and turns that will occur in this case. All right, there you see all of the vehicles are no longer visible there around the former president's private plane, and so any moment now we expect to see it take off down the runway and get in the air and head back to Bedminster, New Jersey. The former president has been here in South Florida for a little over 24 hours, flew in last night, stayed at his golf resort at Doral around 1:30 this afternoon, went to the federal courthouse, was there a couple of hours after his arraignment on those charges of allegedly mishandling classified documents. He pled not guilty, left the courtroom, and then we saw he and his motorcade make a stop in Little Havana at Versailles restaurant, and after that they turned around and headed to the airport, and that's where they are right now.
Right, and when the former president got out in the restaurant, we heard for the first time what he said to his group of supporters, and he said basically this was a rigged deal. For the first time, we're also seeing these sketches, and just to give you a frame of reference, we were not able to have cameras inside the courtrooms. We couldn't have cell phone videos. So these are the first real-time images that we're seeing of sort of the demeanor and the people who were inside the courtroom. You see former President Trump standing there as described. He's got sort of a serious, straight-faced look, but not at all the sort of vivacious former president that we saw once he made his way.
I can add a little color. Yeah, I can add a little color. That the person on the bench was Magistrate Jonathan Goodman, and we also are hearing from that inside the courtroom that it was Trump's lawyer Todd Blanche who said in a very loud, clear voice, "Your Honor, we most certainly enter a plea of not guilty." So that was really most of the talking that went on as related to that. You know, there are now going to be motions about, discovery, and this is, as it says, it's going to be a lengthy process. But, you know, he did have attorneys with him, including Chris Kise, former Solicitor General here in Florida, Todd Blanche, as I mentioned, Abba was there, Lena Abba, who is one of his New York attorneys. So he had representation here, and we will see how it progresses. And
in terms of the other side, the prosecutor Jack Smith, I didn't see any sketches of his legal team there, but do we have any sense of what they may have said and how they might have made a presentation, or did they have to?
They didn't have to make a presentation. They would have been, the magistrate would have asked them if they wanted to request, like a bond or detention pending trial or anything like that. My guess is that was a moot point. So Jack Smith, according to our own Ted Scouten, who was there, was sitting in the front row, not even sitting at the prosecutor's table, as I understand it. You know, he has trial attorneys who will handle the case. He's brought, you know, when you're a special counsel, you can pick the best attorneys in the Justice Department to be part of your team, and that's what he's done. And just as we've been talking about how Donald Trump will find local counsel, I don't know, I haven't gotten the answer to this yet, but there almost certainly is going to be a local prosecutor from the local U.S. Attorney's Office, because again, you want people familiar with the landscape here in the courthouse, what the judges like, what the judges don't like, you know, the procedures. They're all supposed to be the same all over the country, but they do vary a little bit. So you want to have somebody who can give you that insight. The defense wants it, and so does Jack Smith. That's why there's going to be somebody from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami assigned to this case as well.
And moments ago, of course, we saw the former president board the plane. You see right there, Trump. And
Trump Force One, that's what they call it. They call it Trump Force One.
And now he is set to fly to New Jersey, where we're anticipating he's got a huge campaign rally tonight where he's going to get a tremendous amount of support, we expect. He's really rallied his base at this point. I believe we have CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana on the ground now. Lauren, what's happening where you're at? Naja, Jim, actually interesting. He still has a lot of support here at the federal courthouse, even though he is long gone, and we are watching that plane about to take off from Miami International Airport way off in the distance. Over my shoulder, I know you can't see the picture because we are focusing in on Trump's plane right now, but there are still supporters here waving Trump flags. There are people here at the courthouse in downtown Miami still showing their support for the former president, and I can bet there are still supporters over at Versailles in Little Havana, where the former president made a quick stop to thank his supporters just a short time ago. CBS News Miami's Yvonne Taylor was there. Yvonne, were you actually inside of the restaurant? Were you able to hear what the former president had to say?
Well, I'll tell you what, Lauren, I was not really invited, but my photographer was allowed to go into that room. But before we take you and we talk more about that, let me just show you that here where President Trump, or former President Trump, was at Versailles, the iconic landmark, there's still some of his supporters gathered. Passions are still glared up with some of the people that are still honking their horn in the vehicles. But we just talked to one of the people who was in there. It was a selective group of local politicians as well as state legislatures. One of them was Republican state legislature Juan Carlos Porras, who was here. Thank you for joining us, and share with us the experience of having been in that room. What did former President Trump say?
Absolutely. I mean, as you can see, there's been an overwhelming outpour of support from our community, especially the Latin and Cuban American population. It was an honor for me to be here to greet the president as one of the few delegates from our Republican Party here to greet him. He spoke about, obviously, the charges that were brought against him today and kind of the militarization of the judiciary system and the federal government that we've been seeing. He did say that he will make an official word to the country later today, so we have to stay tuned on that. But the president was very positive and very supportive, and as you can see, the community has been here to back him.
And that was exactly one of the things that I was going to ask you, because, I mean, since you were among the privileged ones who managed to be there, the question is, what did he specifically say about the indictment, about the charges, about, I mean, that experience that you were one of the few who managed to witness, I mean, his own words of how he felt about it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's concerning to all Americans, you know, across our country, kind of what's going on with the president, kind of where our government has really gone to start targeting political opponents, and just as we've seen with this president now with these many charges.
But what did he specifically say to you guys? Because what we all want to know is, since you were there, how does he feel about it? And what did he say about the indictment?
Absolutely. Well, as you can imagine, he said it was ludicrous and that he is overwhelmingly not guilty, and we've seen that. And he's
overwhelmingly not guilty.
Overwhelming. That's what we heard. That's what we heard today. But obviously, other than that, as we saw, it's the president's birthday tomorrow as well. So we wished him a happy birthday as well. But obviously, as you can imagine, he'll have a direct quote for the rest of the country later today.
Anybody offer him a cafecito cubano, a little Cuban coffee?
Well, at Versailles, it's hard not to have Cuban coffee and a croqueta, but you know, it's a pillar of part of our community, so we're happy to host him here.
State Legislator Juan Carlos Porras. Thank you for being with us. So, like I said, some of the supporters are here at the typical ventanita, which is known, that's how it's known, the infamous Cuban window where many people come to discuss politics as national, international, and anything and everything that specifically is happening in Latin America. This is a place where they gather, and also where many politicians have made a stop here to greet some of the Cuban American voters. This is the place where former President Trump chose to stop his vehicle right before going to the airport, and only a selective group of people were allowed to be in. They were in a room between the ventanita and the bakery, and he was here for some 20 minutes. Only a few people were there. It was really difficult to listen to what was going on. Reporters were not allowed to go in. That I need to reiterate. They were not allowed. Only a few cameras. And as you heard, Republican State Representative Juan Carlos Porras, he was very brief as far as the indictment is concerned, and he said that he will make a statement later. With that, live from Little Havana, I'm going to go back to you guys.
All right, Ivan, thank you. And we are watching now as the former president's plane now takes off from Miami International Airport. You see it
Picture of
making
what?
its way up the runway there, about to take off and head on up to New Jersey. Not clear if they will make it in time that they thought they would be in New Jersey. The original timeline was thinking they would land around 6:45. Perhaps the aviation experts can let me know if that's possible. I think that would be quite a quick turnaround, so maybe he will be running a little bit late for his scheduled events tonight. But either way, I'm sure they will happen this evening, because there will likely be a large group of supporters awaiting to welcome him back to New Jersey after the day he has had today here in South Florida. Guys?
Thank you so very much. So there we see former President Donald Trump's plane soaring into the skies after his brief but very eventful visit here in South Florida, heading back to New Jersey. The former president here was arraigned in federal court on 37 charges. We have been following this story all afternoon long, and will continue to do so, of course, to see where this story takes us tonight and in the days, weeks, and months to follow.
But if you take a moment to just take in and process, you know, we've been live on air for almost three hours now, to just pause and recognize the magnitude of the situation, that for the first time in United States history, a former president has been indicted on federal charges, including obstruction of justice. We've never experienced something like this before, and for this to be happening in our own backyard here in South Florida is truly a monumental moment. It is a sad moment. It's a somber moment. Of course, we saw Trump supporters standing out and cheering him on, but I think we have to just acknowledge that this is a sad moment in U.S. history, regardless of what side of the aisle that you're on.
And certainly it's a microcosm of where we are in America today. Former President Donald Trump in the air now after leaving South Florida after his arraignment today on charges that he mishandled documents. And of course, stay with us now. CBS News Miami at 5 o'clock with Naja Sherman and Jim DeFeeti is going to hang with us. Begins right now.
This is CBS News Miami.
And off the top, we continue to follow breaking news right now at 5 o'clock. Former President Donald Trump heading back to New Jersey after being arraigned on criminal charges in Miami this afternoon in connection with his handling of classified documents. You have been watching it unfold here live on CBS News Miami and on our stream.
And here is a look inside the courtroom from earlier today. We are seeing sketches of the former president in this most historic moment in U.S. history. The president appearing somber and straight-faced as he hears the charges against him.
Flanked by his legal team, and after this appearance, he pled, of course, not guilty. The former president then made a surprise stop today as he went to a Versailles restaurant. Surprise stop, I guess, maybe is an exaggeration, because a lot of folks there were expecting that he would make this stop. So let's call it a scheduled stop in Versailles, where he glad-handed many of his supporters in the Cuban American community, where he enjoys very staunch support. And good evening, I'm Jim Barry.
And I'm Naja Sherman. Thank you for staying with us for this historic coverage of the indictment of former President Donald Trump. He pleaded not guilty to all 37 counts That includes willful retention of national defense information, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and corruptively concealing a document or a record. We have live team coverage for you tonight. We kick things off with CBS News Miami's Lauren Pastrana.
She has been following this all day from our position down there in downtown Miami by the federal courthouse. Lauren.
Jim, Naja, yeah, between myself and our colleague Keith Jones, we have basically been locked down in this position since before 4 o'clock this morning. So we have seen everything. We've witnessed it all as it's all unfolded here at downtown Miami. But the former president wasn't just here in downtown. He's really crisscrossed South Florida from Doral to the courthouse to Versailles in Little Havana and now to the airport. Just moments ago, he took off from Miami International Airport. But before he took off and before getting on that plane, he posted to social media, specifically to his Truth Social page, saying, quote, "Thank you, Miami. Such a warm welcome on such a sad day for our country." And that, no matter which side of the aisle you fall on, seems to be the consensus that this is sad simply because of the implications that this has for our nation. Support the former president or you don't. This truly is an historic moment. Now, though, let's turn things over to CBS News Miami's Gabrielle Arzola. She was the one who last was closest to the former president as he took off from the airport there. Gabby, what's the latest at MIA?
Hey there. So as of right now, this is the caravan. They just came out of the airport like we were reporting before. We really didn't see any sort of police presence until he left and he was in the air. So this is what we're seeing right now. We have been here all day, and I gotta say it has been extremely quiet. It was really just media here, some folks maybe driving around taking a picture of the Trump plane, but otherwise it was quiet. And this is finally some of the action that we've been seeing. We did not see this motorcade come in. We also didn't see any sort of police presence since we've been here. Maybe a couple cars here and there, but so far has been very quiet. These cars that you're looking at right now, these Chevy Suburbans, just got off the tarmac, one of them holding the former president of the United States, and now he is gone. We saw the plane go up just a few minutes ago, and that's that. So it's been very quiet here. This is now what we have, but otherwise it's been pretty much smooth sailing here on Northwest 36th Street in front of the Signature Airport. Guys.
It looks like you're there on 36th Street and Curtis Parkway, right near the entrance to Miami Springs. So perhaps that's where a lot of people have been able to see some of the action and some of those traffic slowdowns throughout the day. Our team coverage now moves to Little Havana, and that's where former President Donald Trump made a pit stop just a short time ago. Again, we hadn't been reporting it because it wasn't confirmed, but we did anticipate that the former president would be stopping at Versailles restaurant in Little Havana, and the outpouring of support there was what he had likely expected, because they had even reserved a room. Let's turn things over now to CBS News Miami's Peter Dench, who joins us live from there. Peter, you had heard that a caravan would be leaving from the restaurant to the courthouse, but it seems like they just stuck around, and then they were able to get that glimpse of the former president that they've been waiting for.
That's right, Lauren. You know, this is a story we've been sitting on all day. We suspected this was